The story begins not with conquest or splendor, but with migration, a gradual shifting of peoples across the vast grasslands of Central Asia onto the plateau that would one day bear their name. Around 1000 BC, as bronze gave way to iron, and the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt were already ancient themselves, groups of Indo-Iranian tribes began moving southward, bringing with them their language, customs, and a way of life centered around horses and herding. These migrants were not a single unified people, but numerous tribal confederations, speaking related languages and sharing cultural traits. They called themselves Aryans, the noble ones, and their legacy would forever change the landscape of Southwest Asia. Their journey was not sudden. It was a centuries-long movement of peoples who eventually settled across what we now know as Iran, Afghanistan, and parts of Central Asia. The plateau greeted these newcomers with stark contrasts, a land of extremes where towering mountains gave way to salt deserts, where fertile valleys appeared as green oases amid arid expanses. This geography would profoundly influence the development of their civilization, creating natural boundaries between communities while simultaneously forcing innovation in agriculture, water management, and trade. In the north, the Alborz Mountains created a natural barrier along the Caspian Sea. To the west, the Zagros Mountains formed a formidable boundary with Mesopotamia. Between these mountain ranges lay a high central plateau, often dry and forbidding, but punctuated by pockets of remarkable fertility. Here, the earliest settlers established themselves, adapting to their new homeland through ingenuity and persistence. The scarcity of water taught them conservation and cooperation. They developed khanats, underground aqueducts, that transported water from mountain aquifers to their settlements, allowing agriculture to flourish in seemingly impossible locations. These engineering marvels, some of which remain functional to this day, reveal a people who refuse to surrender to environmental limitations. By the 8th century BC, two major groups had crystallized from among these peoples, distinguished by geography, dialect, and political organization: the Medes in the northwest and the Parsa tribe in the southwest. The Medes established themselves in the regions south of the Caspian Sea and in the central Zagros Mountains. Their territory was rich in pasture land, supporting their traditions of horse breeding and cavalry warfare. Towns began to emerge, centered around fortified settlements where tribal leaders established their authority. Ecbatana, modern Hamadan, became their principal city, a place of 7 concentric walls, according to Herodotus, with battlements of different colors, the innermost plated with silver and gold. Further south, in the region of Pars, modern Fars province, the Parsa tribe developed their own distinct society. Living in more arid lands, they became masters of irrigation and dry farming. Their settlements were more scattered, built around reliable water sources, and they maintained a strong tribal structure, focused on kinship bonds and local loyalty. The region's isolation from the great powers of the era allowed them to develop their identity relatively undisturbed, at least initially. Both groups were organized into tribes and clans, led by chieftains who commanded through a mixture of hereditary right and proven ability. They were primarily pastoralists who also practiced agriculture where possible, moving between seasonal pastures with their flocks while maintaining permanent settlements in fertile valleys. These early societies did not develop in isolation. To their west lay the powerful Neo-Assyrian Empire, perhaps the first true military superpower in history. The Assyrians, with their iron weapons, professional army, and ruthless expansion policies, cast a long shadow over the entire Near East. Their records from the 9th century BC contain the earliest written mentions of Medes and the Parsa, typically as targets of military campaigns or as tribute payers. The Assyrian threat forced the previously independent tribes to consider greater cooperation and political centralization. The Medes, being closer to Assyria's borders, felt this pressure most acutely. Tribal alliances formed and dissolved as leaders sought effective responses to Assyrian aggression. According to Herodotus, it was a leader named Deioces who first united the Median tribes into something resembling a kingdom around 700 BC. Whether this account is strictly historical or partially legendary, archaeological evidence confirms that by the late 8th century BC, a more centralized Median society was indeed emerging, with fortified settlements and evidence of social stratification. The opportunity for greater autonomy came with the gradual weakening of Assyria in the 7th century BC. Under the leadership of Cyaxares, who ruled from 625 to 585 BC, the Medes transformed from a loose confederation into a formidable kingdom with imperial ambitions of their own. Cyaxares reorganized the Median military along professional lines, dividing his forces into specialized units of spearmen, archers, and cavalry. This military revolution gave the Medes a fighting force capable of challenging even Assyria. When Babylon rebelled against Assyrian rule, Cyaxares seized the moment, allying with the Babylonians under Nabopolassar. In 612 BC, this alliance achieved what had once seemed impossible: the sack of Nineveh, Assyria's great capital. The fall of this mighty city reverberated throughout the ancient world, marking the end of Assyrian dominance and announcing the arrival of new powers on the international stage. The Medes claimed the northern portions of the former Assyrian Empire, extending their rule across northern Mesopotamia and eastern Anatolia. Under Median hegemony, the Parsa tribe remained subordinate allies, or possibly vassals. Their leaders maintained local authority, but acknowledged Median overlordship. This relationship would prove fateful for the future of the entire Near East. The Median Empire, though short-lived, established important precedents for later state-building in the region. It demonstrated that these peoples could not only resist the traditional powers of Mesopotamia, but could create their own imperial systems. The Medes adopted and adapted elements of Mesopotamian administrative practices while maintaining their distinctly cultural traits. Urban centers grew, trade networks expanded, and artistic traditions flourished, blending indigenous styles with Mesopotamian, Eurasian, and Scythian influences. Ecbatana, the Median capital, became renowned for its splendor, a worthy rival to the great cities of Mesopotamia and a symbol of emerging power. Amid these political transformations, an equally significant spiritual revolution was taking shape. Sometime during this period, scholars debate the exact timing. A prophet named Zarathustra, Zoroaster in Greek sources, began preaching a reformed religion that would become one of the world's oldest continuously practiced faiths, Zoroastrianism. Born into a society where polytheistic beliefs and ritual sacrifices predominated, Zarathustra experienced divine revelations that led him to proclaim a radically different vision. He taught the existence of a single supreme deity, Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, who embodied wisdom and light. Opposing Ahura Mazda was Angra Mainyu, Ahriman, the destructive spirit. All of existence, Zarathustra taught, was caught in the cosmic struggle between these forces. Unlike many ancient religions, Zoroastrianism emphasized individual moral choice. Humans were not passive pawns of the gods, but active participants in the cosmic battle between truth and falsehood, light and darkness. Through good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, believers could align themselves with Ahura Mazda and contribute to the ultimate triumph of good over evil. The prophet's teachings were preserved in the Gathas, 17 hymns that form the oldest part of the Avesta, Zoroastrianism's sacred text. These profound spiritual poems reveal a sophisticated theological system that grappled with questions of free will, the purpose of existence, and the nature of the divine, concerns that would later influence Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Zoroastrianism's spread among the regional populations was gradual and uneven. Traditional religious practices persisted alongside the new teachings, and local variations developed. But the faith's emphasis on truth, ethical behavior, and cosmic order resonated with cultural values across the plateau and provided a spiritual framework that could unite diverse communities. The religion also shaped concepts of kingship and governance throughout the region. A righteous ruler was one who embodied and defended Asha, truth, order, against the forces of Diaruj, falsehood, chaos. This ideological foundation would later help legitimize imperial rule and inspire administrative policies of future kings. By 650 BC, the stage was set for the next chapter in the region's history. The Median Empire had established itself as a major political force in the Near East. The peoples of the southern territories had crystallized their own identity, developing distinct cultural and political traditions while absorbing influences from their Median kinsmen and neighboring civilizations. The foundations were in place: a strong military tradition, experience in governance, architectural and artistic achievements, and a profound religious outlook that emphasized moral choice and cosmic order. What remained was for a visionary leader to unite these elements into something unprecedented, a universal empire that would stretch from the Indus to the Mediterranean, from the steppes of Central Asia to the cataracts of the Nile. That leader would emerge from among the Parsa tribe, a prince named Kurosh, known to the Western world as Cyrus. His vision would transform not just the region's history, but the very concept of empire itself. Under his guidance and that of his successors, a civilization would achieve heights of political organization, cultural achievement, and religious tolerance that would influence all subsequent empires. But in 650 BC, this imperial future remained unwritten. The Medes ruled from their mountain strongholds, the Parsa developed their distinct society in the southern highlands, and the ancient centers of power in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Anatolia continued their age-old rivalries and alliances. None could have imagined how completely the world order would be transformed in the coming century by the rise of a new power. The story of the Achaemenid Empire, the first great dynasty to unite the entire plateau, was about to begin. Before continuing our journey through historical events, we must pause to explore the mythic foundations that shaped Iranian identity for millennia. Long before written records documented the rise and fall of empires, stories were passed down through generations. Tales of heroes and monsters, kings and demons, love and betrayal. These stories would eventually be collected in the 10th century AD by the poet Ferdowsi in his masterpiece, the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings. Though compiled long after the fall of the ancient Achaemenid Empire, the Shahnameh preserves mythical and legendary traditions that date back to the earliest days of settlement on the Iranian plateau. These narratives served not merely as entertainment, but as vessels of cultural memory, repositories of wisdom, and foundations for national identity during times of both glory and subjugation. The epic begins with the creation of the world and the first humans, then traces a succession of mythical dynasties. The earliest of these was the Pishdadian dynasty, founded by King Kayumars, the first human ruler. His grandson Hushang discovered fire and taught humanity to forge metal tools. These primordial kings established civilization, taught agriculture, and set the precedents for righteous rule. Following them came the Khayanid dynasty, whose kings battled the demons of Mazandaran, and whose stories blend supernatural elements with echoes of historical conflicts between settled peoples and nomadic raiders. Throughout these tales runs a consistent theme: the struggle to maintain order against the forces of chaos, to defend civilization against barbarism, to uphold truth against falsehood. This eternal struggle finds its most powerful expression in the central narrative of Rostam, the greatest of all Iranian heroes. Born to the warrior Zal and his beloved Rudabeh, Rostam grew to possess supernatural strength and courage. Riding his faithful steed, Raksh, he served multiple generations of kings, defending the realm against both external enemies and internal corruption. Among his many exploits, none is more poignant than the story of Rostam and Sohrab, a tale that captures the tragic dimensions of fate and the painful complexities of duty. The story begins when Rostam, traveling in a foreign land, meets and falls in love with Princess Tahmina. After spending a brief time with her, he returns to his homeland, leaving behind a bracelet for his unborn child. Years pass, and Tahmina raises their son, Sohrab, in secret. The boy grows to be a mighty warrior like his father, but knows of Rostam only through his mother's stories. When war breaks out between their respective kingdoms, fate brings father and son to the battlefield on opposing sides, each unaware of the other's identity. The two champions meet in single combat between the armies. For 2 days, they wrestle and fight, evenly matched in skill and strength. On the third day, Rostam, drawing on his greater experience, finally overcomes the young warrior and delivers a mortal wound with his dagger. As Sohrab lies dying, Rostam discovers the bracelet he had left with Tahmina so many years before. In that moment of horrific recognition, Rostam realizes he has killed his own son. Sohrab's last words to his father are ones of forgiveness and tragic wisdom. "It is not your fault." This was written in the stars from the beginning of time. How could you know? My mother told me how to recognize you, but my pride kept me from revealing myself first. Rostam's grief knows no bounds. He contemplates suicide, but ultimately chooses to live with his pain, carrying the burden of his unwitting crime for the rest of his long life. The tale ends with a funeral worthy of a prince, as both armies join in mourning the young hero. This story, perhaps the most famous in all Iranian literature, resonates with universal themes: the blindness of human perception, the inexorability of fate, the clash between personal desires and social duties. Yet it also speaks to specifically Iranian cultural values, the importance of family bonds, the respect due to both youth and age, the nobility found in accepting one's destiny with courage, and the devastating consequences when communication fails. For listeners in ancient times, these stories offered more than entertainment. They provided models for behavior, cautionary tales about the misuse of power, and reminders that even the greatest heroes have flaws. The Shahname's narratives of kingship were particularly significant, offering a mirror in which actual rulers could measure their conduct. The ideal king in these stories is just, generous, wise, and humble before divine forces. He consults with advisors, respects traditions, defends the weak, and acknowledges his own limitations. By contrast, tyrannical kings are prideful, greedy, cruel, and dismissive of counsel, and they invariably meet bad ends. One such cautionary figure is Zahak, who allowed evil to whisper in his ear and grew serpents from his shoulders that had to be fed with human brains. His reign brought 800 years of darkness to the world, until the blacksmith Kaveh raised the banner of rebellion and helped Prince Feridun overthrow the tyrant. These mythic kings established many of the symbols and ceremonies that would later be adopted by historical rulers. The far, divine glory that legitimized kingship appears throughout the legends as a tangible aura, visible around rightful sovereigns. Royal insignia like the crown, throne, signet ring, and ceremonial mace all feature prominently. Even architectural elements described in legendary palaces would influence the design of historical structures like Persepolis. Music, poetry, and feasting, central to court culture throughout history, appear in the Shahnameh as royal arts established by mythical kings. The legendary King Jamshid is credited with creating Nowruz, the Iranian New Year celebrated at the spring equinox, a festival that continues to this day throughout the cultural sphere of Iranian influence. The mythical geography of the Shahnameh also helped shape imperial identity. The epic portrays a world divided between Iran, the realm of light and civilization, and Turan, the realm of darkness and barbarism to the north. This symbolic geography would later inform actual foreign policy, especially toward the nomadic peoples of Central Asia. While we now turn our attention back to the historical narrative and the rise of Cyrus the Great, it is important to remember that these myths remained alive in Iranian consciousness throughout the imperial period. The Achaemenid kings, though engaged in practical matters of governance and conquest, drew inspiration and legitimacy from these ancient tales. They consciously positioned themselves as heirs to the legendary Chaonids and protectors of the cosmic order established by the first mythical kings, even as armies marched to Egypt and Greece, as royal messengers sped along the empire's roads, and as administrators managed the vast bureaucracy. These stories were told and retold at court and campfire alike. They provided a shared cultural foundation that helped unite the diverse peoples of the realm. They reminded everyone, from the great king on his throne to the lowliest subject, that they were participants in a grand narrative stretching back to the dawn of civilization. The empire was built not just by armies and administrators, but by poets and storytellers who gave its people a sense of shared destiny and common values. As we follow the rise of Cyrus and his successors, we should remember that behind their political and military achievements lay this rich tapestry of myth that helped make sense of their world and inspired their grandest ambitions. As the 6th century before Christ dawned, few could have predicted that a prince from a subordinate tribe would soon create the largest empire the world had yet seen. The stage for this transformation was set during the latter years of Median dominance, when a child named Kurosh, known to the Western world as Cyrus, was born to the ruling family of Anshan, a region within the land of Pars. The details of this future conqueror's early life are shrouded in legend. The Greek historian Herodotus tells us that the young prince was the grandson of the Median king Astyages, through his daughter Mandane, who married a nobleman named Cambyses. According to the tale, Astyages dreamed that his grandson would one day overthrow him. Alarmed, he ordered the infant killed, but the official entrusted with the task secretly gave the child to a shepherd to raise instead. The native sources tell a different story, portraying the young ruler as a legitimate prince of the Achaemenid lineage, a dynasty that had ruled in Pars for generations. Archaeological evidence suggests the Achaemenids were indeed a powerful family in southwestern Iran, and that they acknowledged Median overlordship while maintaining considerable autonomy in their homeland. Whatever the truth of his origins, the founder of what would become a great empire emerged as the ruler of Anshan, sometime around 559 before the Common Era. His early reign gave little indication of the conquests to come. He was simply one minor king among many who paid tribute to the mighty Median Empire. The world this ambitious leader inhabited was dominated by four great powers. To the north lay Media, ruled by King Astyages from his capital at Ecbatana. To the west was Lydia, controlling much of Anatolia under King Croesus, whose legendary wealth would become proverbial. Further west stood Babylon, where King Nabonidus presided over the fertile plains of Mesopotamia and their ancient cities. And to the south, the pharaohs of Egypt maintained their ancient civilization along the Nile. These powers existed in a delicate balance, engaging in diplomacy, trade, and occasional warfare with one another. None suspected that a fifth power was about to emerge and overwhelm them all. The first step in the ascent of the Achaemenids came with rebellion against Median rule. The accounts differ on what sparked this conflict. Herodotus claims Astyages provoked it through his increasingly tyrannical behavior. The Babylonian records suggest the Anshanite king was chosen by his own troops to lead them against the Medes. Whatever the cause, the outcome is clear. The forces of Anshan marched against the Median king around 550 before Christ. Against all expectations, Cyrus's forces defeated the more numerous Median army. More surprising still, after capturing Ecbatana, the victorious leader did not sack the city or slaughter its inhabitants, as was common practice in that age. Instead, he portrayed himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a legitimate successor to the Median throne, one who would respect Median traditions and incorporate the Medes into his new realm as partners rather than subjects. This policy of imperial integration through respect rather than subjugation would become a hallmark of Achaemenid rule and a key factor in the remarkable stability of the growing empire. But before this vision could be fully implemented, the new sovereign faced immediate challenges from the other powers surrounding his newly won territory. King Croesus of Lydia saw the fall of Media as both a threat and an opportunity. Concerned about the rise of Achaemenid power, but also eager to expand his own realm eastward, Croesus consulted the famous oracle at Delphi. The oracle's ambiguous reply, that if Croesus went to war, a great empire would fall, encouraged the Lydian king to attack. He failed to realize that the empire destined for destruction would be his own. During the winter season, when most armies remained in their camps, Cyrus launched a surprise campaign into Lydian territory. The unprecedented timing caught Croesus off guard. After an indecisive battle at Tyria in eastern Anatolia, Croesus retreated to his capital at Sardis, expecting the Achaemenid army to withdraw until spring, as military convention dictated. But the relentless commander immediately pursued him, catching the Lydian forces unprepared. Outside the walls of Sardis, the Achaemenid king demonstrated his tactical brilliance. Knowing the renowned Lydian cavalry would have the advantage on open ground, he positioned camels at the front of his battle line. The unfamiliar smell of the camels frightened the Lydian horses, disrupting their cavalry charge and allowing the infantry to secure victory. Sardis fell after a brief siege, bringing all of Anatolia under Achaemenid control. Once more, the conqueror showed remarkable clemency to the defeated. Though accounts differ on Croesus's ultimate fate, with some claiming he was burned alive, and others that he became a respected advisor at the Achaemenid court, the Lydian population was generally treated well. The wise ruler preserved local institutions, respected religious practices, and incorporated Lydian nobles into his administration. The former kingdom became a satrapy, or province, within the growing empire. With Media and Lydia now under his rule, the ambitious monarch turned his attention east and northeast. For several years, he campaigned in the regions now encompassed by Afghanistan, Central Asia, and Pakistan. Though details of these conquests are sparse in surviving records, we know he subdued Bactria, Sogdiana, Parthia, and reached at least to the borders of India. These campaigns secured the empire's eastern frontiers and brought valuable resources under his control. The greatest prize yet remained: Babylon, the ancient center of Mesopotamian civilization, and still one of the most magnificent cities in the world. Its king, Nabonidus, had alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk by favoring the moon god Sin, and had spent years absent from the capital, leaving his son Belshazzar as regent. Discontent simmered among both the religious elite and the common people. Sensing this weakness, Cyrus marched his armies toward Babylon in the autumn of 539 before Christ. After defeating Nabonidus's forces at Opis on the Tigris River, the path to Babylon itself lay open. Yet the city, with its massive walls and stored provisions, could have withstood a siege for years. According to the Babylonian Chronicle, the Achaemenid leader achieved a bloodless victory through both military ingenuity and political acumen. His forces diverted the Euphrates River, lowering its level enough to wade under the walls where they crossed the river. More importantly, the shrewd strategist had already won the hearts of many Babylonians by portraying himself as the chosen of Marduk, come to restore proper worship and justice to the city. On October 29th, the Achaemenid army entered Babylon without resistance. The fall of this great city, accomplished almost without bloodshed, marks one of history's most remarkable conquests. In a single stroke, the master tactician gained control of all Mesopotamia and the trade routes linking east and west. The former Neo-Babylonian Empire, including Syria, Palestine, and parts of Arabia, now fell under his rule. The treatment of Babylon set the template for enlightened imperial governance. The famous cylinder, a clay document detailing policies after the conquest, provides remarkable insight into this approach. In it, the magnanimous victor presents himself as chosen by Marduk to bring justice to Babylon. He describes restoring temples, returning sacred objects, and allowing displaced peoples to return to their homelands. Among these displaced peoples were the Jews, who had been brought to Babylon as captives when Jerusalem fell nearly 50 years earlier. The Hebrew Bible praises the liberator as God's anointed, the ruler who permitted the Jews to return to Judah and rebuild their temple. This policy was not special treatment for the Jews alone, but part of a broader approach to the diverse peoples within the realm. The genius of the Achaemenid imperial system, as established by its founder, lay in its balance between central authority and local autonomy. The empire was divided into satrapies, each governed by a satrap, often translated as protector of the kingdom, who collected taxes, maintained order, and represented the king's authority. These satraps were typically nobles from the Iranian plateau, ensuring loyalty to the central government. Yet within this framework, local practices, religions, languages, and customs were generally respected. So long as a province remained peaceful and paid its assigned tribute, its people could largely govern their daily lives according to their own traditions. This approach minimized resistance to imperial rule and reduced the costs of maintaining control over vast territories. The architect of empire established his capital at Pasargadae in his native Pars, where he built a complex of palaces and gardens. The architecture combined elements from the various cultures now united under his rule, symbolizing the inclusive nature of the empire itself. Here, amid the mountains of his homeland, the great king could escape the summer heat of the lowlands while remaining within reach of the empire's administrative centers. During his remaining years, the imperial visionary continued to expand and consolidate his realm. The exact circumstances of his death remain disputed. Herodotus claims he died fighting the Massagetae, a nomadic people north of the Oxus River, around 530 before Christ. Their queen Tamiris supposedly defeated his army and had the corpse beheaded, plunging the head into a skin filled with human blood so that he might drink his fill, as she had vowed. Other accounts suggest a more peaceful end, with the aged monarch dying in his palace at Pasargadae. Whatever the manner of his death, his tomb still stands near that city, a simple gabled stone chamber atop a 6-stepped platform. For centuries, it was tended by magi who guarded the founder's remains, and even Alexander the Great would later pay homage at this site. The legacy left behind was a realm that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indus, from the Caucasus to the Arabian Sea, the largest political entity the world had yet seen. More importantly, the great unifier established a model of imperial rule based on tolerance and inclusion rather than oppression and assimilation. Later, Achaemenid kings would build upon this foundation, further refining the administrative systems he put in place. The influence of this transformative figure extends far beyond his own time. The Greeks, despite their later conflicts with his successors, regarded him as an ideal monarch. Xenophon's Cyropaedia presents him as the model ruler, wise, just, and virtuous. The Roman Empire would adopt many Achaemenid innovations in governance, and modern Iran still celebrates the empire's founder as the father of the nation. Perhaps the most remarkable testament to his vision comes from an unlikely source: the United Nations. A replica of his famous cylinder is displayed at UN headquarters in New York, honored as the world's first charter of human rights. While this may overstate its modern significance, it rightly recognizes that the enlightened ruler established principles of governance, respect for diverse cultures and religions, limits on the power of the state over individuals, and rule by consent rather than terror that remain ideals to this day. As the founder's son, Cambyses, prepared to take the throne, he inherited not just vast territories, but a revolutionary concept of empire, one that would continue to evolve under his rule and that of his successors. The Achaemenid Empire had been born, and the ancient world would never be the same. When the great founder of the Achaemenid Empire departed from this world around 530 before Christ, his eldest son ascended to the throne. The new monarch had already served as regent of Babylon during his father's eastern campaigns, gaining valuable administrative experience. Now, as ruler of the vast domains stretching from the Mediterranean to the Hindu Kush, the son of Cyrus faced the challenge of proving himself worthy of his inheritance. The transition of power proceeded smoothly, testament to the stability of the imperial system established by his predecessor. The new king's first challenge came from his own brother, Bardia, called Smerdis by the Greeks, who governed the eastern provinces. Though the precise nature of this challenge remains unclear in historical records, it appears the monarch swiftly neutralized any threat to his authority. With his position secure, the heir of Cyrus turned his gaze toward the one great civilization that remained independent in the Near East, ancient Egypt, land of the pharaohs. For nearly 3 millennia, Egypt had dominated the Nile Valley, sometimes extending its power into Asia. Now it stood as the last independent kingdom of note in the region, a prize that would complete Achaemenid control of the eastern Mediterranean. The young ruler began preparations for what would become the defining campaign of his reign. The Egyptian pharaoh Amasis, who had ruled for over 40 years, was well aware of the looming threat. He strengthened Egypt's defenses and sought alliances with Greek states, particularly Cyprus and Samos, to counter the Achaemenid naval advantage. But fortune favored the son of Cyrus. In 526 before Christ, Amasis died, leaving the throne to his son Psamtik III, an untested ruler facing the greatest military threat in generations. The timing could not have been better for Achaemenid ambitions. The invasion began in 525. The Achaemenid army marched along the Mediterranean coast, while the fleet, comprising Phoenician, Ionian Greek, and Cypriot ships, sailed alongside to provide supplies and support. A crucial alliance with Phanes of Halicarnassus, a former mercenary commander under the Egyptians who had defected to the invading side, provided valuable intelligence about Egyptian defenses and terrain. One major obstacle stood between the invaders and Egypt proper: the Sinai Desert. Here, the son of Cyrus displayed the same logistical brilliance that had characterized his father's campaigns. According to Herodotus, Arab allies helped the army navigate this harsh terrain by supplying water carried in animal skin containers on camels. Upon reaching the eastern branch of the Nile Delta, the invaders encountered the Egyptian army near Pelusium. Despite their determination and home advantage, Psamtik's forces could not withstand the assault. After a fierce battle, the Egyptian lines broke, and the survivors retreated toward Memphis, the ancient capital. Following this victory, the Achaemenid army pressed deeper into the delta, eventually reaching Memphis itself. After a brief siege, the city fell. Psamtik III was captured, initially treated with respect according to custom toward defeated monarchs. However, when evidence emerged of the pharaoh's involvement in a rebellion, the conqueror ordered his execution. With the fall of Memphis in 525 before Christ, Egypt became a satrapy of the Achaemenid Empire. The victory represented not just a military conquest, but the absorption of the world's oldest continuing civilization into the newest and largest empire. The land of the pharaohs, with its 3,000 years of recorded history, now answered to a throne in distant Pars. The heir of Cyrus was not content with merely conquering Egypt. He adopted the full titles and regalia of an Egyptian pharaoh, presenting himself to his new subjects as the legitimate successor to the ancient line of kings. In Egyptian records, he appears as Mestua, offspring of Re, with a proper pharaonic titulary. Temple inscriptions show him kneeling in the traditional pose of Egyptian kings, making offerings to the ancient gods of the Nile. This cultural flexibility, the willingness to adapt to local traditions of kingship, rather than imposing foreign customs, reflected the imperial philosophy established by his father. While maintaining absolute authority, the conqueror recognized the importance of respecting Egypt's ancient religious and cultural institutions. Not all his policies were so enlightened, however. Herodotus records several stories of the monarch's supposed sacrilege and cruelty in Egypt, including the killing of the sacred Apis bull, the desecration of royal tombs, and the mockery of Egyptian religious customs. While these accounts may be exaggerated or fabricated, perhaps reflecting later Egyptian resentment of Achaemenid rule, they contributed to a negative portrayal of the son of Cyrus in classical sources. Modern historians take a more nuanced view. Archaeological evidence suggests that the conqueror actually continued the tradition of reverence for the Apis bull, with records of a bull's burial during his reign. He also appears to have supported the powerful temple establishments, understanding their central role in Egyptian society and administration. With Egypt secured, the ruler's ambition stretched further. He planned expeditions against Carthage to the west and Ethiopia to the south. The campaign against Carthage had to be abandoned when the Phoenician fleet, the backbone of Achaemenid naval power, refused to attack their own colony. The sailors would serve the empire against others, but not against their own kin across the Mediterranean. The southern expedition into Nubia, modern Sudan, achieved some success, extending imperial influence beyond the first cataract of the Nile. However, an attempted march across the desert to attack the oasis of Siwa ended in disaster when a massive sandstorm allegedly buried thousands of soldiers. While the historical accuracy of this event remains questionable, it marked a check on imperial expansionism in Africa. After nearly 3 years in Egypt, the need to address matters in the heart of the empire drew the monarch back toward the east. It was during this return journey that the most dramatic episode of his reign unfolded, a crisis that would threaten the very existence of the empire. News arrived that a man claiming to be Bardia, the ruler's brother, had seized the throne in his absence. Whether this was actually the real Bardia, supposedly already eliminated earlier in the reign, or an impostor named Gaumata, as claimed in later official accounts, remains one of history's unresolved questions. Regardless of his true identity, the usurper had gained substantial support, particularly by promising a 3-year tax holiday throughout the empire. The sudden revelation of this rebellion severely affected the son of Cyrus. While racing back toward the imperial heartland to reclaim his throne, the monarch died. The circumstances of his death are as mysterious as much of his life. Herodotus claims he accidentally wounded himself with his own dagger while mounting his horse, the wound becoming infected and proving fatal. Native traditions suggest his passing occurred at Damascus. The timing could not have been worse for imperial stability. With no son to inherit the throne and the legitimate line of succession in question, due to the Bardia-Gaumata situation, the empire faced its first major succession crisis less than a decade after its founding. Contemporary Greek writers portrayed the heir of Cyrus as a madman, prone to irrational outbursts and cruelty. Herodotus relates tales of the monarch killing the son of a close advisor with an arrow to prove his sobriety, burying 12 nobles alive headfirst, and executing subjects for minor offences. These accounts have coloured his historical reputation, earning him a place among history's mad monarchs. Yet these negative portrayals must be balanced against his very real accomplishments. Under his leadership, the empire reached its greatest geographical extent prior to the reign of Darius I. The conquest of Egypt, a civilization far older than the Achaemenid realm itself, represented a significant achievement. His administrative policies in Egypt, continuing the tradition of cultural respect established by his father, helped integrate this ancient land into the imperial system. The death of Cyrus's heir in 522 before Christ brought a chaotic end to the first phase of imperial expansion. The Achaemenid dynasty, still young and with its successions untested, now faced a crisis that threatened to unravel all that had been achieved. The empire that had risen so meteorically under father and son stood at a crossroads. Into this moment of profound uncertainty stepped a new figure, not directly of the line of Cyrus, but destined to become perhaps the greatest of all Achaemenid rulers. Darius, son of Hystaspes, a nobleman of the royal clan, would soon claim the throne, eliminate the usurper, and establish his own legitimacy through both military prowess and elaborate ideological justifications. The policies and institutions Darius would establish would define the Achaemenid Empire for the next 2 centuries. But as the summer of 522 before Christ drew to a close, none could predict the remarkable stability and prosperity that would emerge from this moment of imperial crisis. The succession crisis that followed the death of Cambyses in 522 before Christ threatened to unravel the young empire. While the exact details remain shrouded in conflicting accounts, one fact emerges clearly. A figure claiming to be Bardia, the brother of the deceased king, had seized the throne. Whether this was the genuine prince or an impostor named Gulmata, as later official histories would claim, remains debated by scholars to this day. Into this chaos stepped a remarkable man who would transform the realm forged by Cyrus into a sophisticated administrative state that would endure for centuries. Darius, son of Hystaspes, came from a collateral branch of the Achaemenid family. As a young aristocrat, he had served as a spearman in the royal guard, gaining first-hand knowledge of court politics and military matters. According to the famous Behistun inscription, a massive relief and multilingual text carved on a cliff face in western Iran, the new claimant to power led a conspiracy of 7 noble families against the alleged usurper. In a daring raid on a palace at Sikayovatish in Media, the conspirators surprised and killed the man claiming to be Bardia. With the immediate crisis resolved, the son of Hystaspes faced a delicate political situation. Though connected to the royal lineage, he was not a direct descendant of Cyrus the Great. To strengthen his claim to legitimacy, the ambitious noble married Atossa, daughter of the empire's founder, combining pragmatic politics with romantic conquest. Despite these efforts to secure his position, rebellions erupted across the realm. From Babylon to Bactria, from Armenia to Elam, provincial leaders rejected the authority of this new ruler. The Behistun inscription records 19 battles fought in a single year against 9 self-proclaimed kings. Through military skill, strategic brilliance, and sometimes brutal repression, the determined commander eventually suppressed all these revolts. The magnitude of this achievement cannot be overstated. The empire Cyrus had built stood on the brink of dissolution. Through force of will and military prowess, the new monarch preserved the unity of these vast territories, spanning 3 continents and dozens of distinct cultural regions. Once secure on his throne, the son of Hystaspes revealed himself to be more than just a skilled general. He possessed an administrative genius that would transform the somewhat loosely organized territories conquered by his predecessors into a coherent state with standardized systems of governance, taxation, and communication. The new ruler divided the empire into approximately 20 provinces or satrapies, each governed by a satrap appointed directly by the crown. These provincial governors, typically drawn from the aristocratic families, collected taxes, administered justice, maintained order, and raised troops when required. To prevent these powerful officials from developing independent power bases, the monarch appointed separate military commanders and imperial secretaries within each province, creating a system of checks and balances. Royal inspectors, known as the eyes and ears of the king, traveled throughout the realm, monitoring the conduct of officials and reporting directly to the throne. These agents could appear unannounced in any province, with full authority to investigate complaints and correct abuses of power. Through this oversight system, even the most distant regions remained under central control. A standardized tax system replaced the somewhat ad hoc tribute arrangements of earlier years. Each satrapy was assessed a fixed annual tribute based on its resources and productivity. Babylon, the richest province, paid the equivalent of 25 tons of silver annually, while poorer regions like Bactria contributed less. These substantial revenues funded the royal court, the standing army, massive building projects, and the administrative apparatus itself. To facilitate tax collection and commerce throughout this vast realm, the great administrator introduced the first standardized imperial coinage. The golden daric and silver siglos provided reliable currency for both state transactions and private trade. Minted with consistent weight and purity, these coins circulated widely, increasing economic integration across regions previously reliant on barter or local exchange systems. The famous Royal Road exemplified the administrative vision of this ruler. Stretching over 1,500 miles from Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa in southwestern Iran, this highway featured regularly spaced rest stations, bridges over major rivers, and mounted couriers who could carry messages across the entire empire in less than 2 weeks. Herodotus noted with admiration, "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night prevents these couriers from completing their appointed course with utmost speed." This emphasis on communication reflected a sophisticated understanding of imperial governance. Military power alone could conquer territories, but efficient administration required rapid transmission of information and royal commands. The network of roads and courier services allowed the central government to respond quickly to rebellions, natural disasters, or administrative problems even in distant provinces. Legal reforms accompanied these administrative innovations. The monarch encouraged provinces to codify their local laws while establishing certain universal principles throughout the realm. Royal judges appointed by the crown supplemented local legal systems, especially for cases involving imperial interests or disputes between different ethnic groups. The scope of these reforms reveals a grand vision of imperial unity that transcended military conquest. Where Cyrus had laid the foundations through his policy of cultural respect and inclusion, his eventual successor created the administrative framework necessary to translate that vision into practical governance. Together, they established a template for multinational empire that would influence all subsequent imperial projects in Eurasia. In 518 before Christ, the master administrator decided to establish a new ceremonial capital befitting the power and sophistication of the empire. At Persepolis, Parsa in ancient Iranian, construction began on a magnificent complex of palaces, reception halls, and administrative buildings atop a grand terrace, with commanding views of the surrounding plain. Persepolis served not primarily as an administrative center. Susa, Babylon, and Ecbatana continued to function as imperial capitals at different seasons, but as a ritual space where the power and ideology of the empire could be displayed through architecture and ceremonial. Each spring, delegates from all provinces gathered here for the New Year festival, bringing tribute that symbolized their continued submission to imperial authority. The most striking feature of Persepolis was the Apadana, a vast audience hall supported by 72 columns, each 70 feet high. Along the grand staircases leading to this hall, sculptors carved detailed reliefs showing representatives of 23 nations bearing gifts to the king. These carvings, still visible today, provide a remarkable visual census of the empire's diversity. Bactrians with their camels, Lydians carrying armlets, Ethiopians bringing ivory, Indians with gold vessels. These reliefs reveal the imperial ideology at the heart of the ambitious builder's vision, an ordered world where diverse peoples willingly bring their finest products to the great king, acknowledging his benevolent authority. Unlike Assyrian palace reliefs that glorified military conquest and the suffering of defeated enemies, the Persepolis sculptures emphasize peaceful submission and the harmonious incorporation of different nations into a single imperial system. The construction of Persepolis employed craftsmen from throughout the realm: Egyptian stonemasons, Lydian woodworkers, Babylonian brickmakers, Greek sculptors, making the palace itself a physical embodiment of imperial integration. The architectural style blended elements from various traditions, creating something distinctively imperial rather than narrowly ethnic. This cosmopolitan approach extended beyond architecture to the daily functioning of the court and administration. Officials of various ethnic backgrounds served in high positions. The imperial chancellery operated in Aramaic, a Semitic language that served as the administrative lingua franca, while allowing provinces to maintain records in their local languages as well. This pragmatic multilingualism facilitated both imperial control and local autonomy. While focusing on administrative reforms and monumental construction, the son of Hystasipus did not neglect military matters. After securing the internal stability of the realm, he turned his attention to its frontiers. Campaigns in the east extended imperial control into northwestern India, incorporating the fertile Indus Valley into the satrapy of Hindush. To the northeast, Scythian tribes were subdued or pushed back, securing the vulnerable frontiers of Bactria and Sogdiana. Most famously, the ambitious conqueror led an expedition into Europe, crossing the Bosporus on a bridge of boats constructed by Ionian Greek engineers. After subduing Thrace, modern Bulgaria, imperial forces pushed northward across the Danube in pursuit of Scythian raiders who had long troubled the empire's western frontiers. This European campaign, while not achieving all its objectives, established an imperial presence across the Aegean Sea, directly impinging on the Greek world. The encounter between these two civilizations, one an enormous multinational empire, the other a collection of fiercely independent city-states, would have profound consequences for Mediterranean history. Conflict with the Greek city-states began during the later years of this expansionist reign, when Ionian Greek cities along the western coast of Anatolia rebelled against imperial rule in 499 before Christ. Athens and Eretria sent ships to support the rebellion. Though eventually suppressed, this revolt provoked the empire's first serious military intervention in mainland Greece. In 490, an imperial expedition landed near Athens. To the surprise of both sides, the numerically superior forces suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of Marathon. This unexpected setback, while not immediately threatening to the vast realm, marked the beginning of a confrontation between East and West that would continue under subsequent rulers. The defeated monarch had planned a new campaign to avenge Marathon, but domestic concerns and then death intervened. After 36 years of remarkable achievements in administration, construction, and military affairs, the son of Hystaspes died in 486 before Christ, leaving the throne to his son Xerxes. The legacy of this transformative ruler extends far beyond his military campaigns, or even his administrative innovations. He created a model of imperial governance sophisticated enough to manage the largest and most diverse political entity the world had yet seen. The systems he established proved so effective that they continued with only minor modifications for 2 centuries, surviving multiple successions, external challenges, and internal rebellions. When later Greek writers sought to understand the nature of imperial rule, they looked to his reign as the definitive example. When Alexander the Great conquered the empire 2 centuries later, he adopted many administrative practices established during this period. The Romans, in turn, borrowed from both the Alexandrian and the original imperial models in constructing their own systems of provincial governance. More subtly, This monarch's reign represented the culmination of a revolutionary concept of universal empire, first envisioned by Cyrus the Great. Under his administration, the realm became not merely a collection of conquered territories, but an integrated system where diverse peoples could maintain their cultural and religious identities while participating in a common imperial project. This achievement becomes all the more remarkable when compared to the empires that preceded it. The Assyrians and Babylonians had ruled through terror and forced population transfers. The son of Hystaspes, like Cyrus before him, recognized that accommodation of diversity provided a more stable foundation for imperial rule than attempts at cultural homogenization. In the Behistun inscription, the ruler presents himself as the enemy of the lie and the champion of the truth. Beyond its immediate political context, this ideological framework reflects a sophisticated understanding that legitimate authority rests on a moral foundation. Physical power might conquer, but only just governance could create a stable realm. As his son, Xerxes, prepared to take the throne, the empire stood at its zenith, administratively coherent, economically prosperous, militarily powerful. The institutions established during this remarkable 36-year reign would provide the framework for imperial governance long after the memory of individual kings had faded. In creating not just conquests, but systems, the third great Achaemenid monarch had ensured the durability of the imperial achievement. When the son of Hystaspes breathed his last in 486 before Christ, his son Xerxes inherited an empire at the height of its power and organization. The new sovereign, whose name meant ruling over heroes, had been groomed for leadership from youth. As the eldest son, born after his father had become king, Xerxes had a stronger claim to legitimacy than his father had possessed. Through his mother, Atossa, daughter of Cyrus the Great, he united the two branches of the Achaemenid dynasty. The early years of the new reign focused on consolidating authority and addressing internal challenges. Egypt had rebelled late in his father's reign, and the young monarch's first major campaign reconquered the land of the Nile, imposing a harsher rule than before. Babylon, too, attempted revolt, resulting in the destruction of some temples and the removal of the golden statue of Marduk, their chief deity, a significant departure from the more accommodating policies of previous rulers. With these internal matters settled, the royal gaze turned westward toward unfinished business with the Greeks. The unexpected defeat at Marathon under his father's reign remained a stain on imperial prestige. More practically, the fiercely independent Greek city-states posed a potential threat to imperial holdings in western Anatolia. A decisive demonstration of overwhelming power might finally incorporate these troublesome territories into the realm. Preparations for the Greek expedition were methodical and comprehensive, befitting the heir to the great administrator. For 4 years, resources flowed in from across the vast territories. Provisions were stockpiled, ships built, and troops gathered from many nations. The scale of these preparations dwarfed anything the Mediterranean world had previously witnessed. Herodotus claims the assembled forces numbered over 2 million men, clearly an exaggeration, but modern historians still estimate an army of perhaps 200,000 troops, supported by a fleet of around 1,200 vessels. This massive host represented the multi-ethnic character of the empire itself. Immortals from the heartland in their scale armor, Bactrian cavalry from the eastern frontiers, Ethiopian archers from the south, Phoenician sailors commanding the fleets, and dozens of other contingents, each with distinctive weapons, tactics, and appearance. To transport this enormous expedition across the Hellespont, modern Dardanelles, Engineers constructed 2 pontoon bridges using hundreds of ships lashed together with flax and papyrus cables. When a storm destroyed the first attempt, Herodotus tells us that the angry monarch ordered the sea itself whipped as punishment, a tale likely embellished or invented by Greek sources to portray Eastern arrogance, but one that captures the unprecedented scale of imperial ambition. The rebuilt bridges allowed the vast army to cross from Asia into Europe over the course of 7 days and nights in the spring of 480. Simultaneously, to avoid the dangerous waters around Mount Athos, where an earlier fleet had been wrecked, workers spent 3 years digging a canal across the base of the peninsula, an engineering feat that astounded contemporary observers. As this massive force moved southward through Thrace and Macedon, most local powers submitted without resistance. The Thessalians, northernmost of the Greek peoples, accepted earth and water, the symbolic tokens of submission. Only a coalition led by Athens and Sparta prepared serious resistance, and even they could muster only a fraction of the invading numbers. The first major clash came at the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae, where a Greek force under the Spartan king Leonidas attempted to block the southern advance. For 3 days, the defenders held their position against repeated assaults. The disciplined Greek hoplites, fighting in their tight phalanx formation, inflicted heavy casualties on the more lightly armed troops sent against them. Only when a local guide revealed a mountain path, allowing elite imperial forces to circle behind the Greek position, did the battle turn. Realizing his position was compromised, Leonidas dismissed most contingents, but remained with his 300 Spartans and some Thespians and Thebans to cover the retreat. This final stand, though ending in complete defeat, would become one of history's most celebrated last defenses, a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds. With the land route now open, the royal army marched into central Greece, capturing and burning Athens, whose population had evacuated to nearby islands. This moment might have marked complete victory, but for an unexpected naval defeat that would change the course of the campaign. The Greek allied fleet, though outnumbered, had withdrawn to the narrow straits between Athens and the island of Salamis. Here, on a late September day in 480, they lured the larger imperial fleet into confined waters, where superior numbers became a disadvantage. Unable to maneuver properly and with communication difficult amid the chaos, the assembled armada suffered a devastating defeat. The monarch himself, watching from a golden throne on the shores of Attica, witnessed the destruction of the naval forces that had taken years to assemble. This unexpected reversal forced a strategic reassessment. With his supply lines potentially vulnerable to Greek naval activity, the royal commander decided to withdraw the bulk of his forces to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius with a still formidable army to continue operations the following year. The next campaigning season brought a decisive confrontation at Plataea in 479. Here, a united Greek army under Spartan leadership defeated Mardonius's forces in a hard-fought battle. Almost simultaneously, the reconstituted Greek fleet won another victory at Mycale on the Anatolian coast, destroying beached imperial ships and defeating their supporting land forces. These defeats mark the end of direct attempts to conquer mainland Greece, while maintaining control over territories in Anatolia, Thrace, and Macedonia. The empire would never again send a major expedition against the heartland of Greece. The failure of this massive campaign, despite overwhelming numerical superiority, demonstrated the limitations of even the greatest military power when facing determined defenders with geographical advantages. The Greek victories at Salamis, Plataea, and Mycale would later be mythologized as the triumph of freedom over despotism, of Western individualism over Eastern collectivism. This simplistic narrative obscures more complex realities. Many Greek states had Medized, sided with the invaders, and the victorious cities of Athens and Sparta would soon develop their own imperial ambitions. Nevertheless, these battles did preserve the independence of the Greek political system, allowing its unique cultural and intellectual traditions to develop on their own path. For the empire, these setbacks did not represent existential threats. The vast realm continued to function effectively, its central provinces untouched by the distant conflict. The monarch himself, though disappointed by the failure of his European adventure, returned to the imperial core to pursue other projects, particularly completing the magnificent construction program at Persepolis begun by his father. The remaining years of this reign focused on internal affairs and maintaining the sophisticated administrative systems inherited from his father. The colossal buildings erected at Persepolis, including the massive Hall of 100 columns, demonstrated continued imperial prosperity despite the Greek setback. Work also continued on canal projects, road maintenance, and other infrastructure that sustained the economy across 3 continents. Behind the impressive facade, however, subtle signs of imperial challenges were emerging. The costly Greek campaign had drained the treasury, requiring increased taxation. Court life grew increasingly insular, with the monarch less frequently appearing in public and more power concentrated in the hands of palace officials, particularly the harem women and eunuchs who controlled access to the increasingly remote sovereign. In 465, 2 decades after assuming the throne, Xerxes fell victim to a palace conspiracy. The commander of the royal bodyguard, Artabanus, in collaboration with a eunuch chamberlain, assassinated the king in his bedchamber. The conspirators then framed the king's eldest son for the murder and had him executed before placing a younger son, Artaxerxes, on the throne, presumably expecting to control the young ruler as a puppet. If that was indeed Artabanus's plan, it failed. After several months of consolidating his position, the young Artaxerxes turned on the conspirators and had them executed, establishing his own independent authority. Thus began a new chapter in imperial history, one that would see growing challenges both external and internal. The reign of Xerxes, despite ending in conspiracy and assassination, left several important legacies. The massive building projects, particularly at Persepolis, created some of the ancient world's most impressive architectural monuments, showcasing imperial power and multicultural integration. The administrative systems continued to function effectively across the vast territories, maintaining the framework established by his father. Perhaps most significantly, the failure of the Greek campaign led to a strategic reorientation. Rather than direct military conquest, relations with the Greek world increasingly relied on diplomacy, bribery, and exploiting internal divisions among the Greek cities. A more cost-effective approach that often achieved imperial objectives without the risks of direct conflict. When the growing power of Athens threatened imperial interests in the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean, imperial diplomats and gold helped finance Sparta and its allies in the Peloponnesian War, contributing to Athens' eventual defeat. This sophisticated approach to foreign policy, using wealth rather than direct military power to achieve strategic objectives, would characterize imperial diplomacy for the next century. The Greek writers, who are our primary sources for this period, portrayed Xerxes as the embodiment of Eastern despotism and arrogance, a simplistic caricature that neglects his considerable administrative accomplishments and the complexity of running the ancient world's largest political entity. Archaeological evidence from Persepolis and administrative texts from across the empire reveal a more nuanced reality. the continued functioning of a sophisticated multinational state, despite the setbacks in a distant frontier region. For the Greeks, the victory over the great king became a foundational national myth. For the empire itself, the Greek adventure represented merely an expensive frontier campaign that ultimately failed, disappointing, certainly, but hardly central to the ongoing story of imperial development. As Artaxerxes the Wise took the throne, this vast realm entered a new phase, facing both new challenges and continuing to build upon the administrative foundations established by his grandfather, the son of Hystaspes. Beyond the grand narratives of kings and battles lies a more intimate story, how ordinary people lived within the vast imperial framework. The realm established by Cyrus and administratively refined by the son of Hystaspes encompassed remarkable diversity, from Egyptian farmers along the Nile to Bactrian horsemen on the Central Asian steppes, from Phoenician merchants sailing the Mediterranean to bureaucrats in the administrative capitals of Susa and Persepolis. Daily existence varied dramatically across these regions, yet imperial governance provided certain common structures that influenced life throughout the domain. The satrapy system divided the realm into manageable provinces, each with its governor, treasurer, and military commander. Within this framework, local traditions, laws, languages, and religions generally continued without interference, so long as taxes were paid and revolts avoided. For rural communities, where the vast majority of the population lived, contact with imperial authority remained limited. Village life followed agricultural rhythms established millennia before the Achaemenids rose to power. Farmers in Egypt still regulated their plantings by the annual Nile flood, while those in Mesopotamia maintained the ancient irrigation systems that made their arid land productive. Highland communities in Anatolia or Media practiced transhumance, moving their flocks between summer and winter pastures as their ancestors had done. The genius of imperial governance lay in its light touch. Local traditions of land ownership and labor organization continued largely unchanged, with the main imperial requirement being regular tax payments to provincial authorities. These taxes, collected primarily in silver or in kind, grain, livestock, textiles, supported the administrative apparatus, standing army, and lavish court expenditures. In the countryside, agricultural techniques varied by region, but remained largely unchanged from pre-imperial times. The wooden plough, ox-drawn in most regions, turned soil for grain cultivation. Irrigation systems ranged from simple water-lifting devices like the shaduf in Egypt to the sophisticated underground qanat water channels in the arid highlands of the imperial heartland. These qanats, some extending for miles underground, tapped mountain aquifers and delivered water to settlements through gravity flow, minimizing evaporation in the hot climate. Rural communities generally organized around kinship groups and local religious practices. Village elders or councils handled most daily governance, mediating disputes and organizing communal labor for irrigation maintenance or harvest. Only when local mechanisms failed would imperial authorities intervene, usually through the local satraps' representatives. Urban life offered greater complexity and more direct experience of imperial power. Major cities across the realm had existed long before the Achaemenids arrived. Memphis in Egypt, Babylon in Mesopotamia, Sardis in Lydia, Damascus in Syria, and maintained their distinct characters under imperial rule. These ancient urban centers continued their traditional functions as administrative hubs, religious centers, and commercial nodes. The empire added new layers to existing urban hierarchies. Imperial officials, tax collectors, and military garrisons became fixtures in provincial capitals. The governor's residence, often a fortified structure at the city centre, symbolized imperial authority. Multilingual scribes handled correspondence between local authorities and the central administration, typically using Aramaic, the imperial lingua franca. Cities served as crucial nodes in the vast trading networks that spanned the realm. The standardization of weights, measures, and coinage under the sun of Hystaspes facilitated commerce across provincial boundaries. Royal roads, maintained for imperial messengers, benefited merchants as well, providing relatively safe travel with regular way stations. Seaborne trade linked coastal cities from the eastern Mediterranean to the Indus Delta. This interconnected commercial system allowed unprecedented movement of goods across cultural boundaries. Fine textiles from Babylon, glassware from Phoenician cities, ivory from Ethiopia, gold from India, tin from distant western lands, all flowed through imperial markets. Archaeological discoveries from elite tombs throughout the realm reveal this cosmopolitan material culture, with burial goods often combining objects from multiple provinces and even beyond imperial borders. Among the most interesting urban developments were the garrison settlements established throughout the provinces. These communities housed soldiers, often veterans from campaigns, who received land grants in exchange for military service when needed. Many of these settlements contained diverse populations, troops from the imperial heartland, local recruits, and sometimes mercenaries from beyond the borders, particularly Greeks. Over time, these military colonies developed into multicultural centers, where languages, customs, and religious practices blended. Intermarriage between soldiers and local women created new hybrid identities. Archaeological evidence from these sites shows fascinating cultural fusion, architectural styles blending different traditions, household goods showing mixed influences, burial practices incorporating elements from multiple regions. The administrative capitals, Susa, Babylon, Ecbatana, and Persepolis, occupied a special place in this urban hierarchy. Here, the full pageantry of imperial power manifested in monumental architecture, elaborate court ceremonies, and the presence of elites from across the realm. These cities functioned as the empire's multicultural heart, where the highest administrative decisions were made, and imperial ideology found its clearest expression. Persepolis, in particular, embodied imperial aspirations in stone. Unlike the ancient cities adapted to imperial use, this ceremonial capital was built specifically to project Achaemenid power. Its grand staircases, massive columned halls, and intricate reliefs showing tribute bearers from every corner of the realm created a physical manifestation of imperial ideology. Many peoples united under a single sovereign authority. The social hierarchy within the imperial system balanced ethnic diversity with practical function. At the apex stood the great king, almost divine in his elevated status, surrounded by an inner circle of elite families from the heartland. The famous 7 families who had supported the son of Hystaspes in his rise to power maintained special privileges, with their descendants holding the highest offices for generations. Below this innermost elite came a broader aristocracy, drawn primarily, but not exclusively, from the core provinces. These nobles served as satraps, military commanders, and high officials. Imperial policy gradually incorporated local elites from conquered territories into this governing class, creating stakeholders in imperial stability across ethnic boundaries. By the Middle Achaemenid period, Egyptians, Babylonians, and others had joined the ranks of high imperial servants. The educated professional class, scribes, engineers, doctors, architects, occupied a middle position in the social hierarchy. These specialists, whatever their ethnic origin, could achieve significant status through their expertise. The imperial administration valued competence and rewarded it accordingly. Babylonian astronomers, Egyptian physicians, Greek engineers, and Aramaic scribes all found places within the imperial structure. At the base of society stood the ordinary farmers, craftspeople, and laborers who made up the vast majority of the population. Their status varied widely by region according to local traditions. Egypt and Babylonia maintained complex social systems that predated imperial rule, with various gradations between free citizens and enslaved populations. In the imperial heartland, a three-tier system distinguished aristocrats, free commoners, and a dependent labor class. Slavery existed throughout the realm, but took different forms in different regions. Unlike later plantation slavery in the Americas, the ancient slavery typically resulted from debt, criminal punishment, or war captivity. Enslaved peoples worked primarily in domestic service, crafts, mining, and large-scale agriculture. Their legal status varied by region, following local traditions rather than a single imperial standard. For women, legal status and social roles likewise varied extensively across the multinational empire. In the heartland, elite women enjoyed considerable economic rights. They could own property, conduct business, and in some cases hold administrative positions. Archaeological and textual evidence reveals women directing large agricultural estates and workshops with hundreds of workers. The royal women at court wielded significant influence through their proximity to the monarch. Queens, queen mothers, and princesses controlled vast personal fortunes, maintained their own households, and often influenced succession and appointments. Intriguingly, tablets from Persepolis reveal that women workers received the same rations as men doing equivalent tasks, an early example of equal pay for equal work. In Babylonia and Egypt, long-established legal traditions generally protected women's rights to inheritance and property ownership, continuing under imperial administration. Greek observers, accustomed to the restricted status of women in their own society, often remarked with astonishment on the greater freedom of women in eastern regions. Religious life under the Achaemenids exemplifies their approach to cultural diversity. The imperial ideology centered on Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity in Zoroastrian belief, yet official policy supported local religious traditions throughout the realm. Temple establishments, whether dedicated to Marduk in Babylon, Amun in Egypt, or Athena in Greek cities, received imperial patronage and protection. The famous biblical account of Jewish exiles returning to rebuild the Jerusalem temple, supported by Cyrus, illustrates this respect for religious diversity. Similar policies applied across the empire. Religious specialists, Egyptian priests, Babylonian astronomers, Jewish scholars, and Greek oracles continued their functions, often receiving stipends from the imperial treasury. This religious tolerance reflected both practical governance and theological sophistication. Administratively, supporting local religious institutions reduced resistance to imperial rule. Theologically, many believed that local deities were simply different manifestations or names for universal divine powers. The great king could simultaneously be the chosen of Ahura Mazda for his core subjects, the representative of Marduk for Babylonians, and the legitimate pharaoh approved by Amun for Egyptians. Education and intellectual life varied widely across regions. The ancient learning centers of Babylon and Egypt continued their millennia-old traditions of scribal training, astronomical observation, mathematical development, and medical knowledge. In the imperial heartland, elite education emphasized practical skills for governance, military leadership, and ethical conduct. Herodotus famously claimed that noble youth in the empire learned to ride, to shoot the bow, and to speak the truth. A simplification, but one that captures the practical orientation of education in the core provinces. Archaeological evidence suggests literacy was fairly widespread among administrators, with the imperial chancery requiring competence in multiple writing systems. The multilingual nature of the realm created fascinating cultural exchanges. Ideas, technologies, and artistic styles crossed boundaries that had previously limited their spread. Babylonian astronomy influenced Greek thought. Egyptian medical practices were adopted in distant provinces. Architectural techniques from one region appeared in structures thousands of miles away. Transportation networks facilitated both commerce and cultural exchange. The Royal Road from Sardis to Susa, with its regular post stations and courier service, formed the backbone of the imperial communication system. Regional road networks connected provincial capitals to outlying districts. Maritime routes linked coastal cities, with Phoenician, Greek, and Egyptian vessels carrying goods and ideas throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. Travel accounts from the period describe a world where officials, merchants, craftspeople, and others moved with relative freedom across vast distances. A clay tablet from Persepolis might authorize travel rations for an Egyptian architect journeying to the imperial capital, a Babylonian astronomer visiting outlying observation posts, or a noble youth from a distant satrapy coming to serve at court. The material culture that developed within this interconnected realm combined functional standardization with vibrant regional diversity. Imperial coins circulated everywhere, facilitating transactions across provincial boundaries. Certain luxury goods, fine textiles, metalwork, jewelry, developed recognizable international styles that appealed to elites throughout the territories. Yet local craft traditions continued to flourish, often incorporating elements from other regions while maintaining distinctive characteristics. This balance between unity and diversity in material culture mirrors the broader imperial approach to governance, a flexible system that accommodated difference while maintaining overall cohesion. For ordinary subjects, the empire's greatest achievement may have been the prolonged peace it established across vast regions. The Pax Persica, to borrow a term modelled on the later Pax Romana, reduced interstate warfare, banditry, and piracy across territories that had previously suffered endemic conflict. This security allowed agricultural productivity to increase, commerce to flourish, and cultural developments to proceed without the constant disruption of warfare. Life under Achaemenid rule was neither utopian nor uniformly oppressive. The experience varied dramatically depending on one's location, social status, occupation, and historical moment. Yet compared to empires that preceded and followed it, this realm displayed remarkable tolerance for diversity, while maintaining the practical administrative structures necessary for governance across 3 continents. The empire created by Cyrus, administratively refined by the son of Hystaspes, tested in war under Xerxes, and continuing through subsequent monarchs, provided a framework within which millions of subjects lived lives that balanced local tradition with imperial innovation. This complex social reality, more than the dramatic events of royal succession or military campaigns, represents the most profound legacy of the first great multinational empire. The material culture created under Achaemenid rule offers perhaps our most direct connection to this ancient civilization. While written sources provide valuable insights, many come from outside observers with their own biases. The art and architecture produced within the imperial framework speaks with authentic voices from the past, revealing how the empire saw itself and how it wished to be seen by subjects and foreigners alike. To understand the artistic achievements of this period, we must first appreciate their revolutionary nature. The Achaemenids did not begin with a well-established artistic tradition of their own. As rulers of a previously marginal region, suddenly thrust onto the world stage, they encountered the sophisticated artistic traditions of the ancient civilizations they had conquered: Mesopotamia, Egypt, Lydia, and others. Rather than simply adopting any single tradition, they synthesized elements from these diverse sources to create something entirely new: the first truly international royal style. This artistic synthesis embodied the imperial ideology of unity and diversity. From Mesopotamia came monumental scale and certain iconographic elements. Egypt contributed precision in stone carving and specific artistic conventions. From the Anatolian kingdoms came particular architectural forms and decorative motifs. Greek influence appeared in some sculptural techniques. Elements from the steppes of Central Asia informed ceremonial metalwork. These diverse influences combined with native traditions from the Iranian plateau to create a distinctive visual language that was instantly recognizable as imperial. Nowhere is this synthesis more evident than at Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire, built by the son of Hystaspes and his successors. Approaching this magnificent complex, ancient visitors would first climb the grand staircase. Designed with shallow, wide steps to create an appropriately dignified ascent. Unlike the intimidating approaches to Egyptian or Mesopotamian monuments, these stairs welcomed visitors upward with a comfortable gradient that allowed for stately procession. At the top of the staircase, visitors encountered the gateway of all nations, guarded by massive stone lamassu, human-headed winged bulls adapted from Assyrian prototypes, but modified with distinctively imperial stylistic elements. Beyond this gate opened the vast Apadana, or audience hall, its ceilings supported by towering columns, topped with unique capitals featuring back-to-back animal protomes. These columns represent a distinctively imperial innovation. Unlike the massive, closely spaced columns of Egyptian temples or the squatter proportions of Greek colonnades, the Persepolis columns soared to extraordinary heights while remaining relatively slender, creating interior spaces of unprecedented openness and light. This architectural breakthrough required sophisticated engineering knowledge and precise stone-cutting techniques. The famous relief sculptures along the Apadana staircases present perhaps the clearest visual expression of imperial ideology. Here, in careful procession, representatives from 23 nations bring gifts to the great king. Each delegation wears its distinctive native costume, carries characteristic products of its region, and moves with formal dignity in an ordered display of peaceful submission to central authority. Unlike Assyrian palace reliefs showing brutal conquest and subjugated captives, these sculptures present imperial rule as harmonious and consensual. The tribute bearers walk freely, maintaining their cultural identities while participating in the greater imperial project. Even their physical arrangement embodies the imperial worldview. Representatives from different regions alternate, rather than being grouped geographically, visually reinforcing the idea of diverse peoples united under a single authority. The craftsmanship displayed in these reliefs achieves extraordinary delicacy and precision. Textiles are rendered with careful attention to specific weaving patterns. Facial features capture subtle ethnic distinctions without caricature. Individual objects, vessels, weapons, animals, are depicted with such accuracy that archaeologists can identify their materials and origins. This precision served a documentary function, recording the actual diversity of the realm for viewers who might never travel beyond their native province. The sculptural program extends throughout the Persepolis complex, In the central hall of 100 columns, reliefs show the king enthroned under the winged symbol of Ahura Mazda, attended by courtiers. Along other staircases, imperial guards stand in formal rows, their weapons and costumes rendered in meticulous detail. At the treasury, scenes of tribute delivery complement those on the Apadana, reinforcing the central message of diverse peoples willingly supporting the imperial center. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Persepolis sculptures is their creation process, which embodied imperial multiculturalism in practice. Archaeological evidence reveals that craftsmen from across the realm collaborated on these monuments. Egyptian stone carvers likely contributed their expertise in hard stone working. Ionian Greek sculptors may have influenced certain figural elements. Babylonian and Elamite artisans brought their distinct traditions. The result was not a simple collection of different styles, but a genuine synthesis, a new artistic language drawing on multiple sources, but subordinating them to a coherent imperial vision. This collaborative approach extended to other imperial sites. At Susa, a foundation inscription of Darius explicitly acknowledges the multinational workforce that built his palace. The goldsmiths who wrought the gold were Medes and Egyptians. The men who wrought the wood were Sardians and Egyptians. The men who wrought the baked brick were Babylonians. The men who adorned the wall were Medes and Egyptians. Beyond Persepolis and Susa, impressive architectural projects marked imperial presence throughout the provinces. At Pasargadae, Cyrus established a royal park or paradise, from the old Persian word paradisa, that combined formal gardens, waterways, and pavilions in a designed landscape, celebrating both royal power and control over nature. This concept of the paradise garden would influence landscape design from the Mediterranean to India for millennia to come. In the provinces, satrapal capitals featured imperial architectural elements adapted to local conditions. At Sardis in Lydia, Dacilium in Hellespontine, Phrygia, and Xanthus in Lycia, archaeological remains show administrative buildings combining imperial forms with regional traditions. These structures physically embodied the empire's flexible approach to governance, maintaining central authority while accommodating local practices. The portable arts produced under Achaemenid rule display the same cosmopolitan synthesis as monumental architecture. Luxury vessels in precious metals, the famous treasure of the Oxus, provides spectacular examples. Combine technical sophistication with iconography, drawing on multiple traditions. These objects frequently feature animal motifs, rendered with naturalistic attention to anatomical detail, but composed into formally stylized designs. The quintessential imperial drinking vessel, the Rhyton, typically featured a cup portion above an animal protomb. These sophisticated vessels, requiring advanced metalworking skills, became status symbols throughout the realm and beyond. Their practical function in elite drinking ceremonies complemented their symbolic value as markers of participation in imperial court culture. Textile production, though less well preserved archaeologically, clearly achieved extraordinary sophistication. Contemporary sources describe magnificent carpets with figured designs, embroidered garments of remarkable complexity, and patterned fabrics that commanded enormous prices. The famous Alexander mosaic, though later in date, likely depicts actual imperial textiles in its representation of royal garments, showing complex patterns and figures woven or embroidered into luxurious fabrics. Jewelry and personal adornments reached extraordinary levels of refinement under imperial patronage. Gold necklaces with intricate granulation, bracelets terminating in animal heads, elaborate earrings with cloisonné inlay, These objects display technical mastery combined with distinctive imperial aesthetics. The craft traditions that produced these luxury goods blended techniques from across the realm, with Egyptian stone-cutting methods appearing alongside Lydian granulation and Central Asian animal motifs. Glyptic art, carved seals, and cylinder seals played a crucial role in imperial administration while developing a distinctive artistic tradition. Official seals combined imperial iconography with administrative functionality. The famous royal hero motif, showing a crowned figure subduing wild animals or monsters, appeared on imperial seals throughout the realm, visually reinforcing royal authority on documents wherever they circulated. The imperial coinage, initiated by the son of Hystaspes, represents another important artistic medium with practical functions. The golden Daric and silver siglos presented a consistent imperial image, the great king as archer or spearman, recognizable throughout the realm. These coins maintained remarkable consistency in weight, purity, and design over centuries, facilitating commerce while constantly reinforcing the sovereign's image across vast territories. For elite consumption, fine tableware in precious metals created a shared aesthetic for dining and drinking ceremonies from the Aegean to the Indus. The Achaemenid lobed bowl, with its distinctive profile and often featuring rosette designs in the center, became particularly widespread. Similar forms appeared in a range of materials: precious metals for the highest elites, finely worked stone for provincial administrators, and ceramic imitations for those of more modest means. Even practical objects received careful aesthetic attention. A fragmentary brick water pipe from Persepolis bears a trilingual inscription identifying it as the work of the great king, a remarkably intimate connection between the sovereign and the most utilitarian aspects of imperial infrastructure. This attention to quality and beauty in everyday objects reflected a worldview in which order, refinement, and harmony extended from the cosmic realm to the smallest details of daily life. The empire's artistic influence extended far beyond its political boundaries. East Greek artisans adopted imperial motifs and techniques, creating a hybrid style, sometimes called Greco-Persian, that flourished in Western Anatolia. Scythian golden treasures from the steppes north of the Black Sea show clear imperial influence in their craftsmanship and iconography. Even in Athens, despite political hostility to the empire, certain architectural and decorative elements betray Eastern influence. Imperial aesthetics particularly emphasized orderly arrangement, balance, and harmonious integration of diverse elements. These qualities reflected the broader imperial ideology that presented the realm not as an arbitrary collection of conquered territories, but as a cosmic ordering of the world's diversity under righteous sovereignty. Art did not merely represent this ideology, it actively embodied and promoted it through visual means. The careful organization of space at Persepolis, with its axial symmetry and hierarchical arrangement, physically guided visitors through an experience of imperial order. The precisely carved tribute bearers on the Apadana visualized harmonious diversity under central authority. The repetitive motifs on imperial textiles and metalwork reinforced ideas of pattern and order extending throughout the realm. At every scale, from monumental architecture to personal adornments, imperial art communicated the same essential message: diversity harmonized under righteous rule. Color played a crucial role in this aesthetic system, though much has been lost to time. Archaeological evidence reveals that the seemingly austere stone reliefs of Persepolis were originally painted in vibrant colors. Architectural elements featured blue-glazed bricks, golden architectural fittings, and colorful textile hangings. This polychrome reality, only partially recoverable today, created spaces of sensory richness that impressed visitors with their magnificence while communicating imperial messages through color symbolism. Music, dance, and performance, though even more ephemeral than painted surfaces, were integral to imperial ceremonies and self-representation. Contemporary sources describe elaborate court music, using instruments from across the realm. The Persepolis reliefs show musicians accompanying ceremonial processions. These performing arts, like visual arts, likely combined elements from diverse traditions into a distinctive imperial synthesis. The empire's artistic achievements did not end with its political fall. Alexander the Great and his successors adopted many Achaemenid visual traditions, particularly in royal portraiture and court ceremonial. The Parthians and Sasanians, later dynasties ruling much of the same territory, consciously revived and adapted imperial artistic motifs. Even the Islamic artistic traditions that eventually flourished across these regions preserved certain Achaemenid elements, particularly in architecture and garden design. Most remarkably, the artistic vision developed under imperial patronage established enduring principles that would influence courtly arts across Eurasia for millennia. The concept of depicting diverse peoples united under a single authority would reappear in Byzantine, Islamic, and even Chinese imperial art. The Paradise Garden would inspire landscape design from Moorish Spain to Mughal India. The architectural grandeur achieved at Persepolis would set standards for royal building projects across multiple civilizations. In creating a visual language that successfully communicated across linguistic and cultural boundaries, the empire achieved something revolutionary. For the first time, a consistent artistic vocabulary extended across 3 continents, making imperial authority immediately recognizable, whether in Egypt, Anatolia, or the Hindu Kush. This visual coherence helped bind together territories that remained linguistically and culturally diverse. The technological achievements that supported these artistic developments deserve special attention. The massive stone blocks used at Persepolis required sophisticated quarrying, transportation, and lifting techniques. Some weigh over 100 tons, yet show precision, cutting accurate to fractions of an inch. The engineering knowledge necessary for such work drew on Egyptian and Mesopotamian traditions but advanced them to new levels of achievement. Metalworking reached extraordinary sophistication, particularly in gold and silver. Imperial workshops developed techniques for creating complex forms through repoussé and chasing, joining separate pieces invisibly and achieving surface decoration of remarkable delicacy. The famous gold and silver Rita drinking vessels with animal head terminals display virtuoso technical execution alongside artistic refinement. Water management represented another realm where practical engineering and aesthetic sensibility combined. The imperial heartland, with its arid climate, required sophisticated systems to support urban populations and luxury gardens. The Qanat underground water channels, though not an Achaemenid invention, achieved their greatest development under imperial patronage. These remarkable structures, some extending for miles underground, tapped mountain aquifers and transported water to settlements with minimal evaporation loss. At imperial centers, these water systems fed elaborate garden complexes that blended practical agriculture with aesthetic pleasure. The Paradise Garden combined fruit trees, flower beds, shaded walkways, and water features in a designed landscape that proclaimed human control over nature. Archaeological evidence from Pasargadae shows stone water channels with precisely calculated gradients to create specific flow effects, engineering in service of visual and auditory beauty. These imperial gardens would have dramatic influence far beyond their original settings. The concept of the four-part garden, divided by water channels, the Chahar Bagh, spread from Iran to India, Central Asia, and eventually to Moorish Spain. Each culture adapted the basic form to local conditions and aesthetic preferences, but the fundamental design concept established under Achaemenid rule remained recognizable across vast distances and times. Imperial patronage also fostered innovations in urban planning. While working within existing cities like Babylon or Sardis required adaptation to established layouts, new foundations could implement imperial concepts from the ground up. Archaeological evidence from various satrapal centers shows planned urban spaces with rational grid layouts, sophisticated drainage systems, and hierarchically arranged public buildings. These planned spaces embodied imperial values of order and rational organization. The road networks that connected these urban centers represented another blend of practical engineering and imperial ideology. The royal road from Sardis to Susa, with its carefully maintained surface, bridges over major rivers, and regular posting stations, made possible both administrative communication and commercial exchange across vast distances. Lesser roads branched off this main artery, creating a transportation infrastructure that unified the realm in practical terms while symbolizing the sovereign's control over space and distance. Ships and maritime infrastructure similarly connected coastal territories. Harbour works at Sidon, archaeological remains at port facilities in the Persian Gulf, and textual references to imperial fleets all attest to substantial investment in maritime capabilities. These seaborne connections complemented the land routes, creating an integrated transportation network unprecedented in scale and effectiveness. Military architecture adapted to the empire's defensive needs. Border fortresses guarded key mountain passes and river crossings. Garrison towns housed troops in strategic locations. Provincial capitals featured defensive works that combined local building techniques with imperial military requirements. The flexibility of imperial military architecture, using mud brick in Mesopotamia, stone in highland zones, whatever materials best suited local conditions, exemplifies the practical adaptability that characterized the imperial approach. This adaptability extended to religious architecture as well. The empire supported temple construction and maintenance across diverse religious traditions. In Egypt, several rulers added to ancient temple complexes according to Egyptian architectural conventions. In Anatolia, local shrine traditions continued with imperial support. In the Levant, the Jerusalem temple was rebuilt with imperial authorization and funding. This religious architecture maintained regional traditions while acknowledging imperial authority through inscriptions and sometimes subtle design elements. For domestic architecture, archaeological evidence reveals similar patterns of continuity and innovation. Elite residences throughout the realm incorporated elements of imperial style, columned porticos, specific decorative motifs, certain spatial arrangements, while maintaining regional building traditions. This created a material environment where local elites could simultaneously display their cultural roots and their participation in broader imperial networks. Even ordinary households show evidence of imperial influence, primarily through everyday objects. Archaeological excavations reveal imperial-style ceramics, textiles with imperial motifs, and small decorative items reflecting imperial aesthetics in modest homes across the realm. These objects connected ordinary subjects to imperial visual culture, helping to normalize imperial rule through the subtle daily experience of imperial-style material goods. The scale and quality of imperial construction required sophisticated project management. Administrative texts from Persepolis document how workers were organized, supplied, and paid for major building projects. Specialists from across the realm were brought together, provided with raw materials from distant sources, and integrated into coordinated teams under administrative oversight. This logistical achievement, managing multicultural workforces on complex projects, may be as impressive as the architectural results themselves. Raw materials for these projects often traveled enormous distances. The Palace of Susa, according to its foundation inscription, incorporated cedar from Lebanon, gold from Sardis and Bactria, lapis lazuli and carnelian from Sogdiana, turquoise from Khwarezm, silver and ebony from Egypt, ivory from Ethiopia and India, and decorated stone from Ionia. This global sourcing of materials physically embodied the empire's vast geographical reach, while demonstrating its logistical capabilities. The workers who created imperial monuments and luxury goods came from equally diverse origins. Administrative tablets name craftsmen from across the realm: Egyptian stonemasons, Lydian goldsmiths, Babylonian brickmakers, Greek sculptors, working side by side on imperial projects. Their collaborative efforts created the distinctive imperial style, blending techniques and aesthetic elements from multiple traditions into something new and distinctive. These workers were not slaves, but specialized professionals, often organized into hereditary craft guilds with their own internal hierarchies. The Persepolis administrative archives document their payments, rations, and working conditions in considerable detail. Skilled artisans received compensation commensurate with their expertise, and particularly accomplished masters might receive special recognition and rewards from the sovereign himself. The management of these diverse workforces required administrative sophistication and cultural flexibility. Instructions and designs needed to be communicated across language barriers. Technical terminology from different craft traditions had to be reconciled. Work rhythms and practices from different cultural backgrounds needed accommodation. The successful creation of stylistically coherent monuments and objects across these barriers represents a remarkable achievement in cross-cultural management. The imperial artistic program served practical political purposes while achieving aesthetic excellence. By creating a distinctive visual language instantly recognizable as imperial, it helped establish legitimacy across diverse territories. By incorporating elements from multiple traditions, it acknowledged and respected the cultural heritage of various subject peoples. By depicting imperial ideology in visual terms accessible across language barriers, it communicated political messages to populations who might never read an official inscription or proclamation. Perhaps most importantly, imperial art and architecture created physical spaces and objects that embodied the empire's fundamental proposition, that diverse peoples could maintain their distinct identities while participating in a greater unified whole under righteous sovereignty. The ordered diversity of tribute bearers on the Apadana, the harmonious integration of architectural elements from different traditions, the balanced composition of imperial art at every scale, all reinforced this central imperial ideology through visual means. When Alexander of Macedon's forces entered Persepolis in 330 before Christ, they encountered a built environment of unprecedented magnificence, technical sophistication, and ideological coherence. Despite their cultural prejudices against Eastern luxury, even Greek sources acknowledge the awe these monuments inspired. The subsequent burning of the palace complex, whether ordered by Alexander or resulting from a drunken accident, destroyed much of this splendor, but archaeological remains still convey something of its original impact. In the centuries that followed, the artistic and architectural legacy of the empire continued to influence subsequent traditions across Eurasia. The Seleucids, Alexander's successors in much of the former imperial territory adopted many Achaemenid architectural forms and administrative practices. The Parthians and Sasanians consciously revived specific imperial motifs as part of their claim to legitimate succession. Even the Islamic architectural traditions that eventually flourished across these regions preserved certain elements, particularly in palace design, garden layouts, and decorative motifs. Most enduringly, the imperial achievement established a template for how monumental art and architecture could express political ideology, integrate diverse cultural elements, and create physical environments that shaped the experience of sovereignty. This template would influence imperial projects from Rome to China, from Byzantium to the Mughals, in creating the first truly international royal style. The Achaemenid rulers established artistic and architectural principles that would inform courtly arts across Eurasia for millennia to come. The assassination of Xerxes in 465 before Christ marked a turning point in the imperial narrative. Though the realm would continue for another century and a quarter, maintaining its vast territorial extent and sophisticated administrative systems, subtle signs of structural weakness began to appear. The story of this long decline unfolds not as a dramatic collapse, but as a gradual erosion of the foundations that had made the empire so remarkably stable and effective. Artaxerxes I, who took the throne after eliminating his father's assassins, inherited an empire still at the height of its material prosperity. The treasury remained full, the provinces generally quiet, and the administrative systems established by the son of Hystaspes continued to function effectively. Yet challenges both external and internal would test the new sovereign's abilities. In Egypt, always one of the most restive provinces, a rebellion broke out under a local leader named Inaros, who received support from Athens. The Athenians, emboldened by their earlier victories against Xerxes and building their own maritime empire in the eastern Mediterranean, saw opportunity in destabilizing imperial authority in this wealthy province. Though eventually suppressed, this Egyptian revolt revealed both provincial discontent and growing Athenian ambition. Artaxerxes responded to these challenges with a sophisticated diplomatic strategy. Rather than launching another costly direct assault on mainland Greece, he employed gold as his primary weapon. Financial support flowed to Sparta and other Greek states opposed to Athenian dominance, exploiting divisions within the Greek world. This policy of playing Greek cities against each other would continue under subsequent monarchs, proving far more cost-effective than direct military confrontation. The Peace of Callias, negotiated around 449, formalized relations between Athens and the empire. Though details remain disputed by historians, this agreement apparently established mutual spheres of influence, with Athens recognizing imperial authority in Anatolia, while the great king acknowledged Athenian dominance in the Aegean. This pragmatic accommodation demonstrated the empire's diplomatic flexibility and focus on essential interests rather than vendetta. Domestically, Artaxerxes faced the perennial challenge of maintaining central control over powerful satraps in distant provinces. These governors, often drawn from the highest nobility and commanding substantial resources, constantly tested the boundaries of their authority. The monarch countered by appointing royal princes to key satrapies, employing the eyes and ears of the king to monitor provincial administration, and periodically rotating officials to prevent them from establishing independent power bases. Court life during this period grew increasingly complex and ceremonial. Access to the sovereign became more restricted, with elaborate protocols governing who could approach the throne and under what circumstances. The royal harem expanded in size and political influence, with queens, queen mothers and concubines often playing significant roles in succession politics and appointments. Eunuch chamberlains controlled access to the monarch, accumulating substantial behind-the-scenes power. This increasing isolation of the sovereign from direct contact with ordinary subjects reflected both practical security concerns and evolving concepts of royal majesty. But it also created governance challenges, as the monarch became more dependent on officials and family members who might pursue their own agendas. Information reaching the throne was increasingly filtered through multiple intermediaries, sometimes distorting the picture of provincial realities. When Artaxerxes died in 424 after a 41-year reign, a brief succession struggle ensued. Xerxes II held the throne for just 45 days before being assassinated by his half-brother Sogdianus, who himself ruled only 6 months before being overthrown by another half-brother, who took the throne as Darius II. This unstable transition suggested weakening mechanisms for orderly succession. Though once established, Darius II maintained his position for 19 years. The reign of Darius II witnessed further involvement in Greek affairs through the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. Imperial policy firmly supported Sparta, providing financial resources that eventually helped fund the Spartan fleet that defeated Athens in 405. This outcome served imperial interests by eliminating Athens as a naval power that had previously supported revolts in Egypt and elsewhere. Internally, this period saw growing power among the satraps, who increasingly operated with significant autonomy. In western Anatolia, the satrap Tissaphernes and his rival Pharnabazus pursued semi-independent policies, sometimes cooperating with the central government, and sometimes acting on their own initiative. The monarch's ability to control these powerful officials appeared to be diminishing, though the fundamental structures of imperial governance remained intact. Court intrigues intensified during this period. The queen, Parysatis, exercised enormous influence, particularly regarding succession planning. Her favorite son, Cyrus the Younger, received extraordinary authority as commander in western Anatolia, despite being the younger brother of the crown prince Arsaces. This appointment would have fateful consequences when Darius II died in 404. Arsaces took the throne as Artaxerxes II, but his brother Cyrus immediately began plotting rebellion. Drawing on his connections with Spartan military leaders and his own resources as governor, Cyrus assembled an army that included 10,000 Greek mercenaries, the famous 10,000 later immortalized in Xenophon's Anabasis. Marching into the imperial heartland, Cyrus met his brother's larger army at Cunaxa, near Babylon, in 401. Though the rebel forces initially had success, Cyrus himself was killed in the fighting. Without their leader, his cause collapsed. The Greek mercenaries found themselves stranded deep in hostile territory and began their famous fighting retreat northward through difficult terrain, eventually reaching the Black Sea and safety. This episode revealed both growing factionalism within the highest imperial circles and increasing reliance on Greek mercenaries for military operations, trends that would accelerate in the coming decades. Having survived this challenge to his rule, Artaxerxes II faced continued instability on multiple fronts. Egypt regained independence under native pharaohs around 390, beginning a 60-year period outside imperial control. In Anatolia, the satraps' revolt saw multiple provincial governors coordinate their rebellion against central authority, though this movement eventually collapsed due to internal rivalries rather than effective imperial response. Cyprus repeatedly changed hands, with local kings sometimes acknowledging imperial overlordship and sometimes asserting independence with Greek support. Similar patterns of intermittent control characterized imperial relations with coastal cities in the Levant. These fluctuations in provincial loyalty did not represent comprehensive imperial collapse, but did indicate weakening central authority over peripheral territories. In the imperial heartland, court politics grew increasingly volatile. Artaxerxes II had fathered over 100 sons by his concubines, creating a pool of potential successors that guaranteed factional conflict. The aging monarch eventually designated Darius, his eldest son, as official successor. However, Darius was soon implicated in a plot against his father and executed. Another son, Oceus, maneuvered himself into position as the new heir apparent through a combination of political skill and elimination of rivals. When Artaxerxes II died in 358 after a 46-year reign, one of the longest in imperial history, Oceus took the throne as Artaxerxes. The new sovereign immediately demonstrated both ruthlessness and competence, beginning his reign by executing numerous potential rivals within the royal family. Having secured his position through these bloody measures, he turned to the problem of restoring imperial authority in rebellious provinces. Egypt became his primary target. After failed expeditions in 351 and 348, Artaxerxes III personally led a massive campaign in 343 that finally reconquered this wealthy province. His victory ended 60 years of Egyptian independence and demonstrated that imperial military power remained formidable when properly directed. The returning monarch brought enormous wealth back to the imperial treasuries, temporarily restoring financial stability. Despite this significant success, the foundations of imperial power continued to erode. Greek mercenaries now formed the backbone of imperial armies, with native troops playing an increasingly secondary role. These hired soldiers, while effective, had no inherent loyalty to the empire and could switch sides when offered better terms. Reliance on them both drained the treasury and created potentially unreliable military forces. The satrapal system showed increasing signs of dysfunction. Provincial governors operated with growing autonomy, sometimes ruling as virtual kings in their territories. The central government struggled to enforce accountability, with mechanisms like the eyes and ears of the king apparently less effective than in earlier periods. Tax revenues often failed to reach the imperial treasury in expected amounts, suggesting widespread corruption or inadequate administrative control. Court politics remained volatile and often lethal. In 338, Artaxerxes III himself fell victim to a palace conspiracy orchestrated by the eunuch Bagoas, who placed the king's youngest son, Arses, on the throne as a puppet. When Arses attempted to assert his independence after 2 years, Bagoas poisoned him as well and elevated a distant cousin of the royal line, who took the throne as Darius III. This new monarch, the last of his line, had proven himself as a military commander and quickly eliminated Bagoas to establish his independent authority. However, he had barely secured his position when a threat emerged from an unexpected direction. In the spring of 334, Alexander of Macedon crossed the Hellespont with an army of approximately 40,000 troops, beginning a campaign that would bring the empire to its end. The rapid collapse of imperial resistance before Alexander's advance has often been interpreted as evidence of terminal decline, yet closer examination suggests a more nuanced reality. At the Battle of the Granicus River, shortly after Alexander's landing in Anatolia, imperial forces fought effectively and nearly succeeded in killing the Macedonian leader in the early stages of the battle. At Issus in 333, Darius III assembled a substantial army that initially held its position before breaking under Alexander's tactical innovations. The final confrontation at Gaugamela in 331 saw Darius field an enormous force drawn from across the empire, demonstrating that the mechanisms for military mobilization still functioned. Though again defeated by Alexander's superior tactical approach, the battle showed that imperial military power remained considerable. It simply faced an opponent of exceptional skill, leading an army of unprecedented coordination and effectiveness. After his defeat at Gaugamela, Darius fled eastward, hoping to assemble yet another army in the provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana. However, he was betrayed and killed by the satrap Bessus, who attempted to continue resistance under his own authority. Alexander, now claiming the imperial title for himself, pursued the regicide and eventually captured and executed him, symbolically avenging the last legitimate Achaemenid sovereign. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire resulted less from comprehensive internal collapse than from the emergence of an extraordinary external threat at a moment of particular vulnerability. Had Alexander not appeared, the realm might well have continued for generations, despite its structural weaknesses. Other empires in history have survived longer periods of weak leadership, financial strain, and provincial autonomy. The bad fortune of the empire was to face its greatest external challenge, precisely when its internal resilience was at its lowest ebb. Looking back across the century between Xerxes' assassination and Alexander's conquest, certain patterns of imperial decline become apparent. The increasing isolation of monarchs within elaborate court ceremonial reduced their direct knowledge of conditions throughout the realm. The growing power of the harem, eunuch chamberlains, and other palace officials created competing power centers within the central government. Succession struggles became more frequent and violent, disrupting administrative continuity. Financially, the empire faced growing challenges. The tremendous wealth accumulated during the early imperial period gradually dispersed through administrative corruption, military expenses, particularly payments to mercenaries, and the lavish lifestyle of the court and nobility. Revolts in wealthy provinces like Egypt periodically reduced tax revenues. The practice of appointing royal princes and close relatives to key satrapies, while intended to ensure loyalty, often resulted in extravagant provincial courts that drained rather than generated resources. Militarily, the increasing reliance on Greek mercenaries represented both a symptom and a cause of decline. Their effectiveness in battle made them increasingly indispensable, yet their cost strained imperial finances, and their conditional loyalty created strategic vulnerabilities. The native cavalry, recruited from the nobility of the imperial heartland, remained excellent, but infantry quality apparently declined. The complex coordination of multi-ethnic forces, which had been a strength in the empire's prime, became increasingly difficult as provincial autonomy increased. Yet amid these signs of decline, remarkable continuities persisted. The basic provincial structure established by the son of Hystaspes remained largely intact. Imperial roads, postal systems, and other infrastructure continued to function. The multilingual administration, sophisticated legal systems, and commercial networks that had facilitated imperial integration still operated, albeit with reduced efficiency. Even as political authority weakened, the cultural and economic integration of the vast imperial territories continued. The ability of Alexander to utilize existing imperial structures after his conquest testifies to their continuing functionality. He maintained much of the satrapal system, employed many former imperial administrators, and used the established road networks and treasury systems. Had he been conquering a fully collapsed state, such continuity would have been impossible. Instead, he captured a sophisticated imperial apparatus, experiencing institutional fatigue rather than comprehensive failure. In many ways, the extended period of imperial decline revealed the fundamental strength of the systems established in the realm's early days. That an empire of such vast geographical extent and cultural diversity could maintain its essential structures for over 2 centuries, despite periods of weak leadership and external pressures, testifies to the remarkable achievement of its founders. Few political entities in history have demonstrated such institutional resilience across comparable spans of space and time. In the spring of 334 before Christ, a young king from the northern fringes of the Greek world crossed the Hellespont into Anatolia. At 22 years of age, Alexander of Macedon commanded an army of approximately 40,000 troops, a force that, while formidable, represented just a fraction of the military resources theoretically available to his opponent, Darius III. Few observers would have predicted that within 4 years, this young Macedonian would topple the most extensive empire the world had yet known. Several factors converged to make this moment particularly dangerous for the imperial structure. Darius III had only recently secured his position, having come to the throne through the machinations of the eunuch Bagoas, rather than normal succession. Though he had eliminated Bagoas and established his own authority, he had little time to consolidate support or develop the personal loyalty networks essential for effective rule. The imperial finances, while temporarily bolstered by the reconquest of Egypt under Artaxerxes III, remained strained by decades of revolts, military expenses, and administrative corruption. The satrapal system continued to function, but with reduced efficiency and accountability. Provincial governors often operated with significant autonomy, making coordinated response to external threats more difficult. Most significantly, the young man crossing into imperial territory was no ordinary opponent. Alexander had inherited from his father, Philip II, a reformed Macedonian military that combined disciplined infantry, shock cavalry, and sophisticated siege capabilities in a more flexible and coordinated force than anything previously seen in the Mediterranean world. Trained since childhood in the arts of war and raised on epic tales of heroic conquest, Alexander brought both tactical genius and boundless ambition to his eastern campaign. The Macedonian commander also possessed significant intelligence about imperial territories, thanks to advanced reconnaissance and the writings of Greek observers who had travelled or served within the realm. The 10,000 Greek mercenaries who had marched through the imperial heartland after the Battle of Cunaxa had demonstrated both the empire's vast scale and its potential vulnerabilities. Their account, recorded by Xenophon, provided invaluable strategic information for anyone contemplating invasion. The first major confrontation between Alexander and imperial forces came at the Granicus River in northwest Anatolia, shortly after the Macedonian crossing. Here, local satraps had assembled approximately 20,000 troops, including many Greek mercenaries, to challenge the invaders. The battle nearly ended Alexander's campaign before it properly began. During the initial cavalry engagement, the Macedonian king was struck a potentially lethal blow to his helmet and saved only by the intervention of one of his commanders. Having survived this close call, Alexander's forces ultimately prevailed through superior tactical coordination. The imperial army, composed of contingents under different commanders, with no unified leadership, could not match the integrated operations of the Macedonian combined arms approach. This pattern of superior tactical integration, overcoming greater imperial numbers, would repeat throughout the campaign. After this victory, Alexander made a symbolically significant choice. Rather than pushing directly inland toward the imperial heartland, he turned south along the Anatolian coast, systematically reducing coastal cities and eliminating imperial naval bases. This strategy neutralized the substantial imperial fleet by depriving it of friendly ports, effectively removing what might have been a decisive advantage for the defenders. During this coastal campaign, Alexander demonstrated both military brilliance and shrewd political judgment. At cities like Miletus and Halicarnassus, he employed sophisticated siege techniques to overcome stubborn resistance. At the same time, he presented himself as a liberator to Greek cities previously under imperial control, while maintaining strict discipline among his troops to prevent the alienation of local populations through plunder or abuse. The most famous episode during this phase came at Gordium, where Alexander encountered the legendary Gordian knot. According to tradition, whoever could untie this intricate knot would rule Asia. After a brief attempt at conventional solution, the Macedonian leader simply drew his sword and cut through the knot, a dramatic act that symbolized his direct approach to seemingly intractable problems and convinced many observers of his destined victory. By the summer of 333, Alexander had secured western Anatolia and begun moving eastward into Cilicia. Darius III, now recognizing the seriousness of the threat, assembled a substantial army to meet the invader. Historical sources claim the imperial force numbered in the hundreds of thousands, though modern estimates suggest a more realistic figure of perhaps 80,000 troops, still a significant numerical advantage over Alexander's army. The two forces met at Issus, where the coastal plain narrowed between mountains and sea. This constricted battlefield negated much of the imperial numerical advantage, allowing Alexander's more disciplined troops to maintain formation against superior numbers. The Macedonian king personally led his elite companion cavalry in a decisive charge aimed directly at Darius, who was positioned in the traditional central position of imperial commanders. As the Macedonian horsemen broke through toward the imperial command position, Darius chose to preserve himself for future resistance rather than risk capture or death. His withdrawal from the battlefield, while strategically sound in the longer term, triggered a general collapse of imperial resistance in the immediate battle. The imperial camp, royal family, and enormous treasures fell into Alexander's hands. Alexander's treatment of the captured imperial women, Darius's mother, wife, and daughters, demonstrated his political astuteness. Rather than subjecting them to the usual fate of female captives in ancient warfare, he accorded them respect and honors befitting their royal status. This chivalrous treatment served multiple purposes. It portrayed Alexander as a legitimate sovereign rather than a mere raider. It opened the possibility of negotiation with Darius, and it impressed nearby populations with Macedonian restraint and discipline. Following this victory, Alexander again made a strategic choice that puzzled many contemporaries. Rather than pursuing Darius immediately into the imperial heartland, he turned south toward Phoenicia and Egypt. This decision reflected both strategic calculation and Alexander's growing imperial vision. By securing the eastern Mediterranean coastline completely, he would eliminate any possibility of imperial naval recovery. By taking Egypt, he would secure the wealthiest province and potentially gain legitimacy as successor to the ancient pharaohs. The siege of Tyre in 332 demonstrated Alexander's determination and engineering prowess. This Phoenician island city, protected by massive walls and the surrounding sea, had successfully resisted numerous previous sieges throughout its long history. Alexander ordered the construction of a causeway connecting the island to the mainland, a massive engineering project requiring months of labor under constant harassment from Tyrian ships and missiles. When the causeway finally reached the island, Alexander employed siege towers, battering rams, and naval forces in a coordinated assault that ultimately breached Tyre's defenses. His treatment of the conquered city, executing thousands of fighting men and selling women and children into slavery, sent a brutal message about the consequences of resistance, contrasting sharply with his previous displays of clemency toward those who surrendered. Gaza, the last major imperial stronghold on the Mediterranean coast, fell after another difficult siege. With the entire eastern Mediterranean now secure, Alexander entered Egypt, where he encountered virtually no resistance. The Egyptians, who had only recently been reconquered after 60 years of independence, viewed the imperial administration as oppressive foreign occupiers. They welcomed Alexander as a liberator, and Egyptian priests legitimized his rule by recognizing him as a pharaoh and son of Amun. During his time in Egypt, Alexander made one of his most enduring contributions by founding Alexandria, the first and most famous of numerous cities he would establish across his conquests. Located at the western edge of the Nile Delta, with excellent harbor potential, this new city would eventually grow into the Mediterranean's greatest commercial and intellectual center, a lasting monument to Alexander's vision of a world where Greek and Eastern cultures could productively intermingle. Alexander also made his famous visit to the Oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, deep in the Libyan desert. Though what transpired there remains mysterious, with some sources claiming the oracle acknowledged Alexander as the god's son, the visit clearly had profound personal significance for the conqueror. Increasingly, Alexander seemed to view himself not merely as a military leader, but as a figure of cosmic significance, chosen by divine powers for a world-transforming mission. By the spring of 331, Alexander had consolidated his control of the entire eastern Mediterranean coastline and replenished his treasury with Egyptian wealth. He turned his attention toward the imperial heartland, where Darius had used the intervening months to assemble an even larger army than at Issus. Drawing on the resources of the upper satrapies, Media, Persia, Bactria, Sogdiana, and others, the imperial forces gathered on the plains of northern Mesopotamia. Darius selected the battlefield near Gaugamela with care, choosing open terrain that would allow his superior numbers, particularly his cavalry and chariots, full operational freedom. He even had the ground leveled to provide ideal conditions for his chariot charge. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation that would determine the fate of the imperial heartland. On the morning of October 1st, 331, the two armies faced each other across the plain. The imperial force, vastly outnumbering the Macedonians, extended well beyond Alexander's lines on both flanks, threatening encirclement. Parmenion, Alexander's senior general, counseled a night attack to avoid this disadvantage, but Alexander insisted on facing his opponent in daylight, supposedly remarking, "I will not steal my victory." As the battle commenced, Darius launched his scythed chariots against the Macedonian lines, hoping to disrupt their formations before the main engagement. Alexander's troops, well drilled for this threat, simply opened their ranks to let the chariots pass through harmlessly, then closed again in good order. This failure of the chariot charge represented the first of several imperial tactical disappointments on this decisive day. The main battle developed according to Alexander's carefully conceived plan. Observing that Darius had reinforced his left wing to counter the expected Macedonian cavalry attack on that flank, Alexander shifted his elite forces slightly rightward. As the Macedonian line advanced at an angle, imperial forces on the left followed this movement, eventually creating a gap in the center of their formation. Seizing this opportunity, Alexander led his companion cavalry in a wedge formation directly toward Darius's position at the center of the imperial line. Simultaneously, the excellent Macedonian infantry engaged the imperial infantry, preventing them from closing the gap. As at Issus, Alexander's charge aimed directly at the imperial commander, recognizing that the diverse imperial forces depended far more on central leadership than did his own more integrated army. Seeing the Macedonian cavalry breaking through toward his position, and perhaps recalling the outcome at Issus, Darius again chose to withdraw rather than risk capture. His departure triggered confusion among nearby units, which quickly spread throughout the imperial center and right. Meanwhile, on the imperial left, their cavalry had actually broken through the Macedonian lines and reached the baggage train, but this tactical success came too late to affect the battle's outcome as the imperial center collapsed. The Battle of Gaugamela ended with the imperial army in full retreat, though casualties were not as catastrophic as they might have been. Darius escaped with a significant escort, hoping to reach the eastern satrapies and raise yet another army. Alexander, after a brief pursuit, turned toward Babylon, the greatest city of Mesopotamia and one of the imperial capitals. Babylon's surrender without resistance marked a pivotal moment in the campaign. Mazias, the Babylonian satrap, chose to accommodate rather than resist the conqueror, and was rewarded by being allowed to retain his position under the new regime. This precedent of integrating cooperative imperial officials into the new administration would become a hallmark of Alexander's approach, facilitating relatively smooth administrative transition despite the upheaval of conquest. From Babylon, Alexander proceeded to Susa, another imperial capital and site of enormous treasuries that now fell into his possession. The wealth accumulated over centuries of imperial taxation provided resources that would fund the rest of Alexander's campaigns and reward his troops for their efforts. Yet even these riches paled in comparison to what awaited at Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire. The Macedonian army reached Persepolis in January 330, entering the magnificent complex constructed by the son of Hystaspes and his successors. Here stood the physical embodiment of imperial ideology and artistic achievement, the grand staircases with their reliefs of tribute-bearers from 23 nations, the massive audience halls with their forest of towering columns, the treasury containing wealth accumulated over 2 centuries of imperial taxation. Alexander's initial approach to Persepolis demonstrated remarkable restraint. While allowing his troops to plunder the treasury as reward for their efforts, he protected the palaces and administrative buildings from unauthorized looting. He installed a trusted officer to oversee the complex and seemed to recognize its symbolic importance as a center of imperial legitimacy that he might eventually claim for himself. Yet several months later, following a victory banquet, the palace complex was set ablaze in an act of destruction that remains controversial to this day. Ancient sources offer conflicting accounts. Some claim the fire began as a drunken accident during revelry. Others suggest it was a calculated act of revenge for Xerxes' burning of Athens a century and a half earlier, perhaps encouraged by an Athenian courtesan named Thais. Most plausibly, the destruction represented a symbolic statement that the old imperial order had ended and a new era had begun. By burning the ceremonial heart of the empire while preserving its administrative capitals at Babylon and Susa, Alexander may have been signaling both continuity and transformation, maintaining the practical apparatus of governance while ritually concluding its previous ideological framework. Whatever the motivation, the burning of Persepolis marked a pivotal moment in the campaign. The magnificent complex, product of 2 centuries of imperial prosperity and artistic achievement, suffered irreparable damage. Though partial restoration would later occur, Persepolis would never regain its former glory. It became, instead, a monument to imperial rise and fall, its broken columns and charred reliefs testifying to the impermanence of even the grandest political constructions. With the major imperial capitals now in his possession, Alexander turned his attention to pursuing Darius, who had fled eastward toward Ecbatana in Media. The Macedonian army, bolstered by new recruits and the immense wealth captured in the imperial treasuries, moved with remarkable speed through difficult terrain. Yet Darius moved faster still, always managing to stay ahead of his pursuers. From Ecbatana, the imperial sovereign continued eastward, hoping to reach Bactria and Sogdiana, where the satrap Bessus commanded substantial forces. These eastern provinces, with their warlike populations and difficult terrain, might provide a base for continued resistance. However, Darius's position grew increasingly desperate as his escort dwindled through desertion, with many nobles calculating their personal interests might be better served by accommodation with the victorious Macedonian. The final act of the imperial drama unfolded near Hekatompelos in Parthia. Here, Bessus and other high officials with the imperial entourage arrested Darius, perhaps intending to use him as a bargaining chip with the advancing Alexander. When the Macedonian vanguard appeared closer than expected, the conspirators fatally wounded the sovereign and fled eastward, with Bessus now claiming the imperial title for himself. Alexander's troops found Darius dead or dying by the roadside, a victim of betrayal by his own subordinates. The Macedonian commander, whatever his true feelings, recognized a powerful symbolic opportunity. He covered the dead sovereign with his own cloak and ordered the body prepared for royal burial. Later, he would arrange a funeral with full imperial honors at Persepolis, presenting himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the legitimate successor, avenging his predecessor's murder. This portrayal of continuity rather than conquest became increasingly central to Alexander's approach. Having initially presented himself to Greek cities as a liberator from imperial rule, he now positioned himself to the empire's subjects as the rightful heir to the Achaemenid tradition. He adopted elements of imperial court ceremonial, began wearing aspects of imperial regalia, and appointed cooperative imperial officials to administrative positions in his new government. While Bessus and other resistors fled toward Bactria, Alexander consolidated control over the imperial heartland. He visited Cyrus's tomb at Pasargadae, paying homage to the empire's founder in another gesture, linking himself to the Achaemenid tradition. His army, now a mixed force of Macedonians, Greeks, and increasingly troops recruited from former imperial territories, continued eastward in pursuit of Bessus. The campaign against Bessus and subsequent operations in Bactria, Sogdiana, and eventually India lie beyond the scope of our narrative of the Achaemenid Empire. Suffice it to say that Alexander eventually captured and executed Bessus, symbolically avenging Darius III and eliminating the last claimant to the imperial title. The eastern provinces were incorporated into Alexander's growing realm, though at enormous cost in time, resources, and lives. Alexander's own death in Babylon in 323, following a brief illness at just 32 years of age, left his enormous conquests without a clear succession plan. The empire he had assembled fragmented under his competing generals, eventually stabilizing into several large Hellenistic kingdoms. The former imperial territories primarily fell under the control of Seleucus and his descendants, who maintained many Achaemenid administrative practices while introducing Greek cultural elements and settlement. What are we to make of this sudden imperial collapse? How could an empire that had endured for 2 centuries weathering previous external threats and internal crises, fall so quickly to a seemingly minor opponent from its northwestern frontier? The answer lies in a complex interplay of structural vulnerabilities, unfortunate timing, and the exceptional capabilities of the Macedonian invader. The empire Alexander confronted was not at the height of its powers. Decades of declining administrative effectiveness, financial strain, and increasingly autonomous satraps had eroded central authority. The accession of Darius III through irregular channels, followed by the elimination of potential rivals, had weakened traditional noble support networks at precisely the moment when unified response became essential. Military evolution had not kept pace with developments beyond imperial borders. While the cavalry from the imperial heartland remained excellent, infantry quality and training had declined relative to Greek and Macedonian innovations. The growing reliance on Greek mercenaries, while providing quality troops, created financial strain and potential loyalty issues. Most importantly, the complex multi-ethnic imperial armies lacked the integrated command structure and tactical flexibility of Alexander's forces. Yet structural weaknesses alone cannot explain the imperial collapse. The decisive factor was Alexander himself, a military commander of singular talent, leading a revolutionary military organization. His tactical innovations, personal leadership in battle, strategic vision, and remarkable speed of operation repeatedly caught imperial forces off balance. No previous opponent had combined these qualities in such measure, and the empire proved unequal to this unprecedented challenge. Timing also played a crucial role. Had Alexander attacked a generation earlier, during the capable reign of Artaxerxes III, or had Darius III enjoyed a longer period to consolidate his authority before facing external threat, the outcome might have been different. The confluence of imperial weakness and Macedonian strength at this precise historical moment proved decisive. The rapid collapse did not, however, represent comprehensive institutional failure. The administrative systems, communication networks, and basic governance structures of the empire continued functioning under new management. Alexander and his successors maintained the satrapal system, imperial roads, taxation methods, and many other Achaemenid innovations. This continuity amid political change testifies to the fundamental soundness of the imperial framework, even in its final decades. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire thus represents less a total civilizational collapse than a forceful political transition. The basic structures of governance developed over 2 centuries of imperial rule would continue under new leadership, just as the cultural achievements, technological innovations, and administrative practices of the empire would influence subsequent civilizations across Eurasia. As the flames subsided at Persepolis in the spring of 330, they revealed a damaged but still impressive monument to imperial achievement. Like those fire-scarred stones, the legacy of the empire would endure long after its political structure had fallen, continuing to shape the development of successor states for centuries to come. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire to Alexander did not mark the end of Iranian imperial traditions. After 5 centuries under Seleucid Greek and then Parthian rule, a new dynasty arose that consciously positioned itself as the heir to Achaemenid glory. The Sassanids, emerging from the province of Perses, the same region that had produced Cyrus and his successors, would establish a powerful realm that would stand as Rome's equal for over 4 centuries and preserve many elements of ancient imperial traditions. To understand this revival, we must briefly trace developments during the intervening centuries. After Alexander's death, his conquests fragmented under competing generals. The eastern territories of the former empire, primarily fell under the control of Seleucus and his descendants, who established a vast but increasingly unstable realm. While maintaining many Achaemenid administrative practices, the Seleucids introduced Greek cultural elements, established new cities with Greek settler populations, and created a hybrid Greco-Iranian court culture. By the mid-2nd century before Christ, Seleucid authority had weakened in their eastern provinces. From the northeastern region of Parthia emerged the Arsacid dynasty, leading a confederation of semi-nomadic peoples who gradually conquered the Iranian plateau, Mesopotamia, and portions of Anatolia. These Parthians, as they became known to the outside world, established a loosely centralized empire that would endure for nearly 5 centuries. The Parthian realm, while powerful, never achieved the administrative centralization or cultural coherence of the Achaemenid Empire. Its structure more closely resembled a confederation of semi-autonomous kingdoms and city-states under Arsacid overlordship. Parthian kings claimed the ancient title King of Kings, but in practice shared power with powerful noble families controlling extensive territories. Greek cultural influence remained strong in urban centers, while Iranian traditions persisted in the countryside and among the nobility. Rome's expansion eastward brought these two powers into conflict, beginning a centuries-long rivalry that would help define the geopolitics of the ancient world. Despite occasional Roman victories, such as Trajan's brief conquest of Mesopotamia, the Parthians generally succeeded in maintaining their independence and territorial integrity against the Western superpower. By the early 3rd century after Christ, however, the Parthian system showed signs of terminal decline. Repeated succession struggles had weakened central authority. The noble families, particularly the powerful Suren and Karen clans, increasingly operated as independent powers rather than loyal supporters of the throne. Roman invasions had repeatedly demonstrated Parthian military vulnerabilities. The stage was set for dramatic change. In this context emerged Ardashir, a local ruler from Persis claiming descent from a priest named Sasan. Having consolidated control over his home province by 220, Ardashir began expanding his territory at Parthian expense. His decisive victory over the last Parthian king, Artabanus V, in 224, marked the formal beginning of the Sassanid dynasty, though the complete conquest of former Parthian territories would require several more years of campaigning. From the outset, Ardashir and his successors presented their rise not as the establishment of a new imperial tradition, but as the restoration of ancient glory. They explicitly connected themselves to the Achaemenids, claiming direct descent from the Khayanid kings celebrated in Zoroastrian tradition. While modern historians doubt the literal truth of these genealogical claims, they reflected a genuine cultural continuity and a conscious program of imperial revival. This program manifested in multiple domains. Administratively, the Sassanids established a more centralized system than their Parthian predecessors, with provinces directly governed by officials appointed by and responsible to the sovereign. The ancient title, King of Kings, Shahanshah, was retained but now backed by more effective central control. A hierarchical bureaucracy using written Middle Persian rather than the Aramaic of earlier periods supported this centralized governance. Zoroastrianism, which had remained influential but not officially dominant under Parthian rule, became the state religion under the Sassanids. Ardashir, whose father had been a priest, gave unprecedented authority to the Zoroastrian clergy. Religious texts were standardized, fire temples established throughout the realm, and non-Zoroastrian faiths, while generally tolerated, placed in a subordinate legal position. This religious organization provided ideological support for royal authority, while promoting cultural unity across the diverse realm. Architecturally, the Sassanids created monuments consciously evoking Achaemenid grandeur while incorporating new elements. At Firuzabad, Bishapur, and Ctesiphon, massive palaces featured distinctive innovations like the Iwan, a vaulted hall open at one end, that would influence subsequent Islamic architecture. Rock reliefs carved at sites like Naqsh-i-Rustam, where Achaemenid royal tombs were located, explicitly connected Sassanid sovereigns to ancient imperial traditions while celebrating their own achievements. Militarily, the Sassanids developed a more effective system than their Parthian predecessors. While maintaining the excellent cavalry traditions of previous Iranian empires, they added heavily armored cataphracts, both horse and rider covered in armor, and war elephants to their arsenal. Engineering corps capable of sophisticated siege operations complemented their field forces. These military innovations would help them hold their own against Rome and later Byzantium for centuries. The early Sassanid period witnessed remarkable expansion. Shapur-Damban, son and successor of Ardashir, achieved spectacular victories against Rome, even capturing the Emperor Valerian, the only Roman emperor ever to die in enemy captivity. At its height under Shapur I, the Sassanid realm extended from the Euphrates to the Indus, from the Caucasus to the Arabian Sea, closely approximating the eastern half of the Achaemenid Empire at its greatest extent. Unlike their Achaemenid predecessors, however, the Sassanids faced a Western rival of comparable power and sophistication. Rome, and later the Eastern Roman, Byzantine Empire, matched the Sassanids in military capabilities, administrative complexity, and cultural confidence. This balance of power led to a centuries-long standoff, with frontier regions like Armenia, Upper Mesopotamia, and parts of the Caucasus frequently changing hands, but neither side able to achieve decisive advantage. This Roman-Sassanid rivalry profoundly shaped both civilizations. Military innovations developed by one side were quickly adopted by the other. Diplomatic protocols evolved to manage relations between equals, rather than imposing terms on defeated opponents. Trade continued even during hostilities, spreading cultural influences in both directions. Religious developments, particularly the rise of Christianity in the Roman world and Manichaeism within Sassanid territories, created new dynamics of competition and internal diversity. Internally, Sassanid society developed distinctive class structures that would influence subsequent Iranian history. At the apex stood the royal family, claiming divine right to rule through the concept of royal glory, Far. Below them, four main classes comprised the social order: priests, warriors, scribes and producers, peasants and artisans. Social mobility existed but within defined channels, typically through service to the state or religious establishment. Urban life flourished under Sassanid rule. The capital Ctesiphon grew into one of the world's largest cities, with its massive arch, Tak Kasra, remaining the largest single-span vault constructed until modern times. Other major urban centers included Gundashapur, famous for its Academy of Medicine and Philosophy, Bishapur, with its distinctive architectural blend of Iranian and Roman elements, and Istakhr, near ancient Persepolis, maintaining connection to Achaemenid traditions. Trade networks extended in all directions from these urban centers. Sassanid merchants established trading colonies as far as China and Southeast Asia. Luxury goods, particularly silk from China and spices from India, passed through the realm en route to Mediterranean markets. This role as intermediary between East and West brought both prosperity and cultural exchange, with artistic influences flowing alongside commercial goods. The silk industry exemplifies this pattern of economic and cultural exchange. Initially dependent on imports from China, the Sassanids eventually acquired silkworm eggs and the technical knowledge to produce their own silk textiles. These fabrics, featuring distinctive medallion patterns often containing royal or religious imagery, became highly valued luxury goods throughout the Mediterranean world and as far as northern Europe. Byzantine textile production would be heavily influenced by Sassanid examples, creating a lasting artistic legacy. Religious diversity characterized the Sassanid realm, despite Zoroastrianism's official status. Jewish communities, established since Achaemenid times, maintained significant presence, particularly in Mesopotamia, where the Babylonian Talmud was compiled during this period. Christian populations grew, especially in western provinces, creating occasional tension with Zoroastrian authorities, but generally finding accommodation within the system. Manichaeans, Buddhists, and adherents of various local traditions added further complexity to the religious landscape. This diversity occasionally provoked tension, particularly when religious affiliations aligned with political conflicts. Christians within Sassanid territories sometimes faced suspicion due to their co-religionists in Byzantine territories, especially during periods of warfare between the empires. Yet pragmatic tolerance generally prevailed, with religious minorities accepting subordinate legal status in exchange for protection and communal autonomy. The Sassanid era also witnessed significant intellectual developments. The academy at Gundashapur became a major center of medical knowledge, translating and synthesizing Greek, Indian, and indigenous Iranian medical traditions. Astronomical observation and mathematical calculation continued traditions established in Mesopotamia millennia earlier. Philosophy flourished, with translations of Greek works and original compositions in Middle Persian, creating a sophisticated intellectual culture. This intellectual activity sometimes crossed imperial boundaries. After the closing of Plato's Academy in Athens by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 529, several Neoplatonic philosophers found refuge at the Sassanid court. Their eventual return to Byzantine territory brought Persian-influenced philosophical concepts back to the Mediterranean world. Similarly, Indian mathematical and astronomical knowledge entered the Middle East through Sassanid intermediaries. The Middle Sassanid period witnessed cycles of strength and weakness, often connected to the quality of individual rulers and ongoing conflicts with Rome, Byzantium. Periods of internal instability, typically resulting from succession struggles or noble rebellions, alternated with reigns of remarkable achievement and imperial prosperity. Through these fluctuations, the basic structures of the state and its cultural achievements remained impressive. The reign of Khosrow Anushirvan, who ruled from 531 to 579, represents perhaps the highest point of Sassanid achievement. Under his leadership, the realm underwent comprehensive administrative reforms, strengthening central authority while rationalizing the tax system. Relations with Byzantium stabilized through a major peace treaty. Cultural and intellectual life flourished, with translations of Indian and Greek works enriching the indigenous traditions. Khosrow II Parviz initially continued this success, even achieving spectacular territorial gains against Byzantium in the early 7th century. At its greatest extent under his rule, the Sassanid realm briefly controlled Egypt, the Levant, and much of Anatolia, territories that had been part of the Achaemenid Empire but had remained under Western control for nearly a millennium. This remarkable expansion, however, proved short-lived and ultimately catastrophic. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius launched a desperate counteroffensive that not only recovered the lost territories, but carried the war into the Sassanid heartland. By 628, Khosrow II had been overthrown and executed by his own nobles, and the Sassanid state plunged into chaos with multiple claimants to the throne in quick succession. This internal collapse, coming after decades of exhausting warfare, left the realm fatally weakened on the eve of its greatest challenge. That challenge emerged from an unexpected direction. The Arab conquests, unleashed by the new religious and political movement of Islam, struck the Sassanid realm at its moment of greatest vulnerability. Despite valiant resistance, particularly at the Battle of Qadisiyah in 636 and Nihavand in 642, the Sassanid military could not withstand these energetic new opponents. The last Sassanid sovereign, Yazdegerd III, fled eastward before being killed in 651, bringing the dynasty to its end. The Arab conquest brought profound changes to the former Sassanid territories. Islam gradually replaced Zoroastrianism as the majority religion, though the conversion process took centuries and was never total. Arabic became the language of administration and high culture, though Persian would eventually reassert itself in modified form. New political structures replaced the Sassanid system, integrating these eastern territories into the rapidly expanding caliphate. Yet beneath these changes, remarkable continuities persisted. The administrative practices, court ceremonies, and governmental structures of the caliphate drew heavily on Sassanid precedents. Persian-speaking bureaucrats continued to staff the administrative apparatus. Literary and artistic traditions maintained many pre-Islamic elements while developing in new directions. The concept of Iran as a distinct cultural and historical entity survived the end of its political independence. Most significantly, Persian culture would experience a remarkable revival within the Islamic context. By the 9th and 10th centuries, semi-independent dynasties of Iranian origin, like the Samanids, began patronizing Persian literature and art. The epic traditions of pre-Islamic Iran found magnificent expression in Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, composed around 1000 after Christ, which preserved ancient Iranian historical and mythological traditions for future generations. This cultural resilience testifies to the profound legacy of both the Achaemenid and Sassanid imperial achievements. Though separated by centuries and differing in many aspects of their organization and ideology, both empires had established traditions of governance, cultural expression, and identity that transcended their political structures. The fall of dynasties did not erase the civilizational achievements they had fostered. As we conclude our exploration of the Sassanid chapter in Iran's imperial story, we recognize a pattern of continuity amid change that characterizes much of this region's history. The conscious Sassanid revival of Achaemenid traditions, followed by the preservation of Sassanid elements within Islamic civilization, demonstrates how imperial legacies can transcend their original political frameworks to influence subsequent historical developments across centuries and even millennia. The collapse of the Sassanid realm in the mid-7th century marked the end of independent Iranian imperial rule, but not the end of the imperial legacy. Though Arab conquerors brought new religion, language, and governance to territories once ruled from Persepolis and Ctesiphon, the achievements of these ancient empires would continue to shape civilization far beyond their temporal and geographical boundaries. This influence manifested across multiple domains. In governance, the administrative framework established by the son of Hystaspes provided a model for managing vast territories that subsequent empires adopted and adapted. Alexander maintained this system after his conquest, as did his Seleucid successors. More directly, the early Islamic Caliphate incorporated numerous Sassanid governmental practices, often employing Persian-speaking bureaucrats who brought their administrative traditions with them. The physical infrastructure created under imperial rule demonstrated remarkable longevity. Road networks established under the Achaemenids remained important routes for centuries. Some Qanat underground water channels constructed during this period continue functioning today, perhaps the longest-serving human-built infrastructure on Earth. Cities founded or developed under imperial patronage. Alexandria in Egypt, Kandahar in Afghanistan, Bukhara in Central Asia, maintained their importance through multiple changes of political control. Artistic and architectural influences spread widely from imperial centers. Sassanid textile patterns appeared in Byzantine silks and later European fabrics. The four-part garden divided by water channels, the Chahar Bagh, travelled from Iran to India under the Mughals to Central Asia and eventually to Moorish Spain. Architectural elements like the Sassanid Iwan, vaulted hall, became fundamental to Islamic architecture from Spain to India. Religious concepts developed or refined within the imperial realm had perhaps the most profound and far-reaching impact. Zoroastrian ideas, cosmic dualism, linear time progressing toward a final judgment, heaven and hell, and future salvation, influenced Judaism during the Babylonian exile and subsequent Achaemenid period. These concepts later entered Christianity and Islam, faiths whose adherents now number in the billions. Though filtered through multiple theological transformations, elements of ancient Iranian religious thought continue shaping how many people understand their relationship to the divine. The linguistic legacy extends from ancient times into the present. Persian vocabulary entered languages from Turkish to Urdu, from Armenian to Swahili. The administrative use of Aramaic under the Achaemenids established it as a lingua franca across the Middle East, facilitating its later role as the everyday language of Jesus and the matrix from which the scripts for Arabic, Hebrew, and many other Middle Eastern writing systems developed. Most significantly, the imperial approach to cultural diversity established an alternative model to the assimilationist policies of most ancient states. The Achaemenid innovation, further developed under the Sassanids, of a universal empire that accommodated diversity rather than imposing uniformity, influenced imperial projects from Rome to the modern era. The recognition that different peoples could maintain their distinct identities while participating in a shared political community established a framework that continues informing approaches to multicultural governance. The concept of Iran itself, a cultural, linguistic, and historical entity distinct from its political expression in particular states, owes much to the imperial legacy. Through consciousness of shared history, language, and cultural traditions shaped during the imperial period, Iranian identity survived repeated conquests, dynastic changes, and even religious transformation. This persistence enabled the remarkable cultural revitalization that occurred within the Islamic context, producing the brilliant achievements of medieval Persian literature, art, and science. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, composed around 1000 after Christ, exemplifies this cultural resilience. This monumental epic preserved ancient Iranian historical and mythological traditions, connecting the Islamic present to the pre-Islamic past, and maintaining cultural continuity across religious transformation. Its enduring popularity kept awareness of imperial achievements alive in popular consciousness. The geographical concept of Iran also shows remarkable continuity from ancient to modern times. Though political boundaries fluctuated across centuries, the core territorial understanding of Iran, as centered on the plateau between the Zagros and Hindu Kush mountains, maintained consistency from Achaemenid times through the Sassanid period and into the Islamic era. This geographical conception eventually informed the modern nation-state, which adopted Iran as its official name in 1935, explicitly linking the contemporary polity to its ancient imperial predecessors. In contemporary geopolitics, awareness of Iran's imperial past informs both internal and external perceptions of its regional role. Iranian self-conception as heir to ancient civilizational achievements shapes its diplomatic self-presentation and strategic thinking. External powers often view Iranian regional influence through the lens of historical imperial extent. These perceptions, whether embraced or rejected by various parties, demonstrate the continuing relevance of imperial memory in modern international relations. Even in international institutions, echoes of imperial concepts appear. The Cyrus cylinder, recording the conqueror's policies after taking Babylon, has been described as an early human rights charter, with a replica displayed at United Nations headquarters in New York. While this interpretation applies contemporary concepts to an ancient text, it reflects the enduring relevance of Achaemenid approaches to governance and diversity in modern discourse. The most profound legacy of these empires lies not in specific institutions or artifacts, but in demonstrating how political frameworks can transcend their original contexts to shape subsequent civilizations. The administrative systems, artistic traditions, religious concepts, and models of multinational governance pioneered under these ancient rulers continue influencing how we organize ourselves politically, express ourselves culturally, and understand ourselves spiritually. This pattern, political structures rising and falling, while their cultural contributions evolve in new contexts, offers perhaps the most significant insight from our exploration. The empires of Cyrus, the son of Hystaspes, and their successors created not merely ephemeral states, but enduring civilizational legacies that continue shaping our world in ways both recognized and unrecognized. In this sense, the first great multinational empire achieved a profound form of immortality, its influence continuing not in political structures, but in the ongoing human conversation about how to create societies that balance unity with diversity, tradition with innovation, and power with justice.